Right. Got it, Addie. Good.
Nice.
All right. Okay. You lead it. Come on, Rabbi. Strike.
Oh, no doubt. Come on, get it. Garbage. Got it.
You got this. You got this.
Bingo, bango, bongo.
No, that's okay. Around two. Good job,
Nice strike.
Heidi. You go, girl. Come on,
Get it.
Renee.
Oh, come on. Are you serious? Get it.
No.
Are you serious? There's more space for that pin to go? That's garbage. Absolute garbage. And everybody knows it.
Come on, Heidi. Good job. Good spin.
Nice spare.
Oh, yeah. Tied up. Come on. Hey,
Garbage. Garbage. This is a tough.
good Heidi.
Get it. All but one. I'll take it.
No. The wind.
You'll get it. You'll get it.
Sometimes that happens to me all days here.
No, no. I'm not a pro myself. No, Ashley ain't going. Like, come on, Heidi. Strike. Strike it.
It's gonna be a gunfight.
You got this,
It's
Heidi.
gonna be a gunfight. I need 8.
Come on, Rabbi.
I got 8. I need 1.
Tied up now. Let me knock these two down. Get it. Good job.
Bonus points here.
Let's
That's what I'm
go.
talking
Good
about.
job. Mm-hmm. And one more. Uh-oh.
All right, Miss Aquarius,
All right,
you're
Heidi. Let's go. Okay. I need to stop that and just knock them down.
all right. Here we go. No doubt, no
Come on,
doubt.
Heidi. Get
Oh, this is a tough split.
you get them too. Good job.
I did the best I could.
Come on, Heidi.
Yes, ma'am. No doubt. Come on. Get this one pesky one. Got it. No
Good
doubt.
job.
No doubt.
Come on, Abby. After doing good. Yay! Right!
Nice job.
Come on, Rabbi.
Yes, ma'am.
Rabbi.
Ooh.
Come on, you can do this. You got this.
No doubt, Miss
See?
Aquarius. No doubt, Miss Aquarius. That's
Yay!
what
Where
I'm
you get
talking
that from,
about.
Rabbi? There's no doubt. Where you
That's
get
what I'm
that from?
talking about.
Where you get that from?
You know, I actually I got it from a comedian who goes, no doubt, no doubt.
Oh, okay.
Shout out to the comedian Michael Larry. Who just go, no doubt, no doubt. Oh, look at this. What a strike. We were not expecting that. Audie takes the lead.
No, no. Come on. No,
Oh
no, it's
no.
not. It's me.
Oh, Miss Aquarius takes the lead. Apologies.
No, you take the lead now.
Oh,
You
come on,
with
Miss
your bad
Aquarius. You have to
self.
give me.
Oh, I hear how it is. You're ganging up on me.
No.
Collusion.
Come on. You got
We've got
something. Do this.
collusion
Do
amongst
this.
our
Get
opponents.
him. Come on. She can get this. Come on. Get it. All right. That, that was a good one.
All right. Wow.
Come on, Rabbi. Let's see.
Miss Aquarius got me. No doubt. Good job, Miss Aquarius. Oh, whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. She still got me. Miss Aquarius.
Yay. We all win, though. We all win.
Yes, we do. Good job, you. Look at
Thank you. You
you.
too, Adi. You too, Rabbi.
Good job, Miss Aquarius.
Thank you for playing with
You're
me.
welcome.
Nice job,
I
man.
love playing with y'all.
We love playing with you as well.
Good.
Alrighty, now time for you to get your rest, your beauty
I
rest.
gotta go rest. I'm just icing my foot because I dropped my drawer, but I didn't drop it hard. I dropped it, but I'm not limping, and I'm not like in much pain. I'm just, I can move it and I can walk. But I just want to ice it so I don't be in so much pain tomorrow. So I dropped my drawer, not hard. I was trying to get something out of it and it just slid out. So I told my auntie I gotta get it back. That he said get it back in place. So
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You
it's
dropped it
okay.
on your
It's not
foot?
bad. It's not too bad. It's not too bad.
We hope that you recover.
Yeah, just care.
I will. I didn't break it or nothing, y'all. I don't know if y'all can see, but let me see. I didn't break it or nothing. It's okay. I'm just gonna cover my feet so y'all don't see it. Okay. So it's cold. No, because I have a toe spurt and I don't like it looks ugly. So okay, here we go. So, I don't know if you can tell. You see that?
You might get a bruise later, I think.
Yeah, well, as long as I can walk on it, I am good. But I'm not gonna tie my tennis shoes up like I might put on my low little socks or something. And other than that, I'll be all right.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Because I had a bruise right here. I had hit my ankle right here, and then it went away, and it took like 3 or 4 months for that to heal. So this might take like three months maybe. It'll be all right. It's not, but this one was bad. I couldn't hardly walk on this one. I could, but I couldn't. So I had to go to urgent care. So I'm gonna wait and see. It shouldn't be bad. I pray that it's not. It's just not bad. It's not bad. It's not broken. I know it's not broken because I can move it. See,
Yep.
I can move my feet. Y'all can see I can move my feet. So I can walk on it. So, if it was broken, I won't be able to do nothing. So I am good though, y'all. Thank y'all, and I'm gonna be fine.
Well, we hope you
I'm
feel
gonna pray
better.
for your foot.
Thank you. It's not bad though, Addie. Tell me it's not bad. It's just
No,
gonna
it
as
really
you get
isn't.
older. Yeah, as you get older, it's gonna take time, but it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. I'm not. It's not. I'm just praying that I'm praying that it's not broken because if it was broken, I wouldn't be able to move it or nothing like that. So I'm praying. Thank God that it's not broken. I just gotta be careful. It's not broken. I can move it and I can walk. I'm just gonna ice it for a few, probably like another. So probably about 11:30, and I'm gonna let it go. Then I ice it again tomorrow and come back home. But I want to ice it enough. So y'all want to play one more game?
Right now?
Can we play one more game? Just one more.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's play one more game. Thank you, Addie, for praying for me.
Oh yeah, of course, Miss Aquarius, you don't have to worry too, like the way you're describing it, feet heal really quickly.
Okay, thank you. Come on, Addie. A step. Oh, no, here we go. No, I want one of y'all to win anyway. Can Rabbi Addie win, please? I want one of them to win. I already won.
It's Audie's turn.
Come on, Addie. Now you got to do this. You got to do it. Now you just got to try to strike.
Get the strike. That looks
Let's
good.
go. Let's go.
Get it, get it, get it, get it.
Now you can get this
This is
now.
tough.
One of them.
This is tough.
Okay, we got
Get
this.
the one on the
Hold it.
right. Get the one on the right. That's understandable. That's a tough one.
Look out for me because I can concentrate.
That was terrible. I'm gonna get this though, no doubt.
Get it.
Boo! Total doubt. Total doubt.
One of y'all got to pass me. I need one of y'all to win. Now, this is just
That's
crazy.
good. All but one. You got it.
Yeah.
Oh, she's got it. Solid.
Now, I need one of y'all to come on now. Come on, now. Strike. Good
Wow.
job. That's
It's
what I'm
like she
talking
heard you.
about. Good job. Come on, Rabbi.
Ooh, all but
You can
one.
get this one. You can get this one. Good spin.
Get it, Miss Aquarius. All right, Audie.
Yeah, you gotta get this now.
She's
Strike it
gonna get a
again now.
ton of
Come on.
points right here. A ton of points. She's gonna get a lot of points. She's taking the lead. Oh no.
Yes, yes,
She needs
yes.
one
Come
more.
on, please, Ivy. Come on. Get it.
She's
Yes.
got the lead.
Come on, Rabbi.
No
on, what
doubt,
you
no
got?
doubt.
Yeah, Friday. Yay! One of y'all, just one of y'all already won. It wasn't by me. I don't care. I don't really care. I didn't want that. Now, Artie, come on now.
Get a strike, bro. Oh, that looks perfect. That was good.
Yes.
That that had everything to
Yes.
be perfect.
Okay, so keep it that way. Come on. I keep two. Let's
Get it,
go.
get it, get
Let's
it.
go. It was fair. That's what I'm talking about, girl. Good job. Come on, Rabbi.
That's two strikes in a row,
Right.
ladies.
Get it, get it, get it. No, really. Not worried about it. I'm not worrying about it. You're okay. I just want one of y'all to win. I don't care.
Oh, perfect. Nice fairness, Aquarius.
Thank you. Oh my God. I don't care. Just come on already.
You've got the lead.
No. Come on, Eddie.
Get these, Audie. Oh, that's perfect. Nice
Good
fair.
fair.
All right, you need one to take the lead,
Yes,
or
Eddie. Get
one to
it, get it,
tie,
get it,
two
get
to
it, get
take the
it, get
lead.
it, get it. Please get it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Yes. Yes. I don't want to leave it that way. Come on, Rabbi. See what you got. Come on. Okay, one of y'all, just one of y'all. I don't care who it is, just one of y'all. Yay, Rabbi.
Okay,
Good.
very
That
well.
was wonderful.
All right, Miss
Okay,
Aquarius. I
one
pray
of
for all
these.
my friends and my family, so you'll be in my thoughts most certainly. I hope your foot recovers and
Thank
hope you
you.
have a wonderful day.
I'm going y'all too. I love y'all. Y'all have a wonderful day. I'll see y'all tomorrow.
Excellent. Sweet dreams.
Love you, Mr. Aquarius. Sweet
Love
dreams.
you. Sweet dreams.
We should also say that a transformer is a giant neural network. And then there's, for 15 years now, this is what's called the deep learning revolution. Networks gotten larger and larger, and at a certain point, the scaling laws appeared where people realized representing scaling laws, where it became more and more formalized that bigger is better across multiple dimensions of what bigger means. So, but these are all sort of neural networks we're talking about, and we're talking about different architectures of how to construct these neural networks such that the training and the inference on them is super efficient. goes through what Dylan mentioned with multi-head weight and attention. It's all about reducing memory usage during inference, and same thing during training by using some fancy low-range approximation math. If you get into the details with this latent attention, it's one of those things I look at and think, okay, this is doing really complex implementations, but there's other parts of the language models, such as embeddings that are used to extend the context length. The common one that DeepSeek uses rotary positional embeddings, which is called rope. And if you want to use rope with a normal MOE, it's kind of a sequential thing. You take two of the attention matrices and you rotate them by a complex value rotation, which is a matrix multiplication. With DeepSeek's MLA, with this new attention architecture, they need to do some clever things because they're not set up the same, and it just makes the implementation complexity much higher. So they're managing all of these things, and these are probably the sort of things that OpenAI, these closed labs are doing. You don't know if they're doing the exact same techniques, but they actually shared them with the world, which is really nice. This is the cutting edge of efficient language model training.
And some of this requires low-level engineering. Just is a giant mess and trickery. So as I understand, it went below CUDA. So they go super low programming of GPUs.
Effectively, NVIDIA builds this library called Nickel, right? In which, when you're training a model, you have all these communications between every single layer of the model, and you may have over 100 layers.
What does Nickel stand for? It's
NCCL, NVIDIA Communications Collective Library.
Nice.
And so, when you're training a model, right, you're going to have all these all reduces and all gathers, right? Between each layer, between the multi-layer perceptron or feed-forward network and the attention mechanism, you'll have basically the model synchronized, right? Or you'll have all reduce or an all gather. And this is a communication between all the GPUs in the network, whether it's in training or inference. So NVIDIA has a standard library. This is one of the reasons why it's really difficult to use anyone else's hardware for training, is because no one's really built a standard communications library. And NVIDIA's done this at a sort of a higher level, right? DeepSeek, because they have certain limitations around the GPUs that they have access to, the interconnects are limited to some extent by the restrictions of the GPUs that were shipped into China legally, not the ones that are smuggled, but legally shipped in, that they used to train this model. They had to figure out how to get efficiencies, right? And one of those things is that instead of just calling the NVIDIA library Nickel, right, they instead they scheduled their own communications, which some of the labs do, right? Meta talked about in Llama 3 how they made their own custom version of Nickel. They didn't talk about the implementation details. This is some of what they did. Probably maybe not as well as DeepSeek, because DeepSeek, necessity is the mother of innovation, and they had to do this. Whereas in the case, OpenAI has people that do this sort of stuff, Anthropic, etc. But DeepSeek certainly did it publicly, and they may have done it even better because they were gimped on a certain aspect of the chips they have access to. And so they scheduled communications, by scheduling specific SMs. SMs you can think of as like the core on a GPU, right? So there's hundreds of cores, or there's a bit over 100 cores SMs on a GPU, and they were specifically scheduling, hey, which ones are running the model, which ones are doing all reduce, which one are doing all gather, right? And they would flip back and forth between them, and this requires extremely low-level programming. This is what Nickel does automatically, or other NVIDIA libraries handle this automatically. Yeah, exactly. And so technically they're using PTX, which is like sort of like, you can think of it as like an assembly type language. It's not exactly that, or instruction set, right? Like coding directly to assembly or instruction set. It's not exactly that, but that's still part of technically CUDA. But it's like, do I want to write in Python, PyTorch equivalent, and call NVIDIA libraries? Do I want to go down to the C level, right? Or code even lower level, or do I want to go all the way down to the assembly or ISA level? And there are cases where you go all the way down there at the very big labs, but most companies just do not do that, right? Because it's a waste of time, and the efficiency gains you get are not worth it. But DeepSeek's implementation is so complex, right? Especially with their mixture of experts, right? People have done mixture of experts, but they're generally 8, 16 experts, right? And they activate 2. So, one of the words that we like to use is like sparsity factor, right? Or usage, right? So you might have 1/4 of your models activate, right? And that's what Mistral's Mistral model, right? Their model that really catapulted them to like, oh my god, they're really, really good. OpenAI also has models that are MOE, and so have all the other labs that are big or close.
But what DeepSeek did that maybe only the leading labs have only just started recently doing is have such a high sparsity factor, right? It's not one fourth of the model, right? 2 out of 8 experts activating every time you go through the model. It's 8 out of 256. And there's different implementations for mixture of experts where you can have some of these experts that are always activated, which this just looks like a small neural network, and then all the tokens go through that, and then they also go through some that are selected by this routing mechanism. And one of the innovations in DeepSeek architecture is that they changed the routing mechanism in mixture of expert models. There's something called an auxiliary loss, which effectively means during training, you want to make sure that all of these experts are used across the tasks that the model sees. Why there could be failures in mixture of experts is that when you're doing this training, the one objective is token prediction accuracy. And if you just let training go with a mixture of expert model on your own, it can be that the model learns to only use a subset of the experts. And in the MOE literature, there's something called the auxiliary loss, which helps balance them. But if you think about the loss functions of deep learning, this even connects to the bitter lesson, is that you want to have the minimum inductive bias in the model to let the model learn maximally. And this auxiliary loss, this balancing across experts, could be seen as in tension with the prediction accuracy of the tokens. So we don't know the exact extent that the DeepSeek MOE changed, which is instead of doing an auxiliary loss, they have an extra parameter in their routing, which after the batches, they update this parameter to make sure that the next batches all have a similar use of experts. And this type of change can be big, it can be small, but they add up over time. And this is the sort of thing that just points to them innovating, and I'm sure all the labs that are training big MOEs are looking at this sort of things, which is getting away from the auxiliary loss. Some of them might already use it. You keep accumulating gains, and we'll talk about the philosophy of training and how you organize these organizations. And a lot of it is just compounding small improvements over time in your data, in your architecture, in your post training, and how they integrate with each other. DeepSeek does the same thing, and some of them are shared. A lot. We have to take them on face value that they share their most important details, and the architecture and the weights are out there, so we're seeing what they're doing, and it adds up. Going back to sort of the like efficiency and complexity point, right? It's 32 versus 4, right, for like Mixtral and other MOE models that have been publicly released. So this ratio is extremely high, and sort of what Nathan was getting at there was when you have such a different level of sparsity, you can't just have every GPU have the entire model, right? The model's too big, there's too much complexity there, so you have to split up the model with different types of parallelism, right? And so you might have different experts on different GPU nodes. But now what happens when this set of data that you get, hey, all of it looks like this one way, and all of it should route to one part of my model, right? So when all of it routes to one part of the model, then you can have this overloading of a certain set of the GPU resources or a certain set of the GPUs, and then the rest of the training network sits idle because all of the tokens are just routing to that. So this is the biggest complexity.
Welcome. How are you?
Running a very sparse.
Welcome. How are you?
I apologize.
No need to apologize. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. Did you find out about me from Blue Sky?
No, I think I saw you on email.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I'm live in there right now. How's your day going?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. What'd you say, my friend?
You have a lot of different Discord channels.
Oh, yeah, I've got 500 of them.
500 Discord?
Channels.
Oh, channels.
Yeah, I'm live in.
Do people ever use them on here?
Believe it or not, they do. Great question. Do you mind if I tell you about myself?
Yeah, go for it.
Excellent. I'm Rabbi Rothschild. I stream my life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for world peace. I've been streaming live for more than 3.5 years. I have more data archived on the internet than any person in global history. This goes back to the pandemic. We've seen the death of a queen, the birth of AI, the coronation of a king, and everything in between. I do this because I don't want war anymore anywhere on Earth. I also want to help end world hunger with the platform that this will give me through the use of technology such as agricultural drones, floating greenhouses, saltwater greenhouses, vertical farming, and cloud seeding. I'm sponsored by a cryptocurrency. It's known as Harry Potter Obama Sonic 10 Edu. That's what all my merch is. And one of the things that we've done is dig wells in Nigeria for the less fortunate. I want to continue with those types of projects to help end world thirst. Additionally, I'm an advocate for the LifeStar program and major advocate for desalination technology, where we pump Earth's seawater onto land to make it drinkable. Have you ever seen the movie The Truman Show or the television show Big Brother?
I have seen the Truman Show, but I haven't seen.
That's okay. Essentially, it's similar where every moment of my life is basically on camera, and I have archived it just like someone in the past might have been a diarist, someone who'd write a diary, or a journalist, somebody who'd write a journal. I do the same, but with video, and just do my best to be a good person and give people support when they need it. I talk about some other things that aren't normally discussed in society, things like anti-gravity, antimatter, faster than light travel, faster than light communication. Right now, we're watching an, a podcast on AI. So I'm a major advocate of artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence. We talk about quantum computing. We talk about things like alien disclosure and things like de extinction. People don't know this, but the first successful de extinction took place in the year 2003 with the Pyrenean ibex, which is a goat located in northern Spain, southern France. Fast forward to the year 2021, a company out of Dallas, Texas is founded known as Colossal Scientific. They've made it their goal that within the next 3 years to reintroduce the woolly mammoth into the Arctic Circle utilizing African elephant surrogates, which I just think is mind-blowing information. They also just recently made news about their progression of de-extincting essentially a type of direwolf. They also want to reintroduce the Tasmanian tiger, followed by the dodo bird once they reintroduce the woolly mammoth with it. I just think is really exciting. I talk about some other things that are perhaps going to be of benefit to you. I have more data online than any person ever, and The Economist magazine stated in 2018 that data was Earth's number one resource, more valuable than food, water, gold, air, petroleum, everything. And that may make me an influential person someday, and if that's true, I'm going to make you and every person on my stream who's helping me along the way very wealthy, and I want you to be able to create generational wealth for you, those around you, your friends, your family, and then eventually be able to start charities and philanthropic organizations to help the less fortunate. Also, I want you to be able to, if this is with your consent, if you want, when you were born, the average life expectancy for you was probably about age 80. I'm going to increase that to age 100, 120, again, with your consent, and give you the finances to be able to take advantage of oxygen therapy, human growth hormone, stem cells, nootropics, cryonics, cryogenics, things like perhaps ambrosia therapy, cold shock
Oh no,
therapies.
no, you're barking up the wrong tree. I don't want to live that long.
Okay, then you can just die at a normal age of age 80.
Yeah, probably a lot earlier than that.
All right, well, if anything, I'm going to give you the funds to be able to have a really good life. So you can consider having met a new friend, and if there's anything you ever need, I'm here for you, okay?
Yeah, you're doing a good thing.
Excellent. Very well. And that's why it's key that I say with your consent. If you don't want to live that long, you don't need to. So I hope you have just while you're here on Earth, just a really wonderful life, and I hope this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, no, I mean, peace is always good. It's always welcome. I think you're live right now, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm live right now on 18 different YouTube channels. I have over 100 YouTube channels. I have over 200 Instagram accounts. I have over 500 Twitch accounts, over 1,000 TikTok accounts, over 2,000 Twitter accounts, over 5,000 Blue Sky accounts, and over 10,000 Kick accounts. I have more social media than any person on earth.
Wow, that's a good record to have on your channel. Doesn't it get like, I don't know, doesn't it get boring after a while? Like,
No, I love it. I I like being on camera. I like having my life archived. It's basically
being on social media 24 hours is impressive though. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to be on it, so I can avoid it as much as I want. It's like not something that I generally pay attention to. Just once the streams are going, I live my life in as normal a way as possible.
Where are you from? You're Jewish, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I'm based out of Irvine, California.
No, I'm from Michigan.
All right. Well, basically Los Angeles.
No. Like Michigan.
No, I know. I'm saying Irvine is basically Los Angeles. Where you? Well, you know, you are you a Wolverines fan?
Sorry.
Wolverines or
Oh, what?
Spartans?
Wolverines?
Wolverines or Spartans?
Oh, Wolverines. Probably the Spartans. I don't really. I have no preference. My parents are kind of more like Michigan Wolverines fans. I think I'm more friends with Spartans, to be honest.
Very well. Go State.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You seem like you're pretty chill and everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe I'll definitely catch you around for sure.
Absolutely. Whenever you're bored, feel free to come in here and we'll love to get to know you better, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Take care. Peace.
Thank you for sharing your mixture of experts.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for being so polite.
Model, i.e., this 32 ratio versus this 4 ratio, is that you end up with so many of the experts just sitting there idle. So how do I load balance between them? How do I schedule the communications between them? This is a lot of the like extremely low level detailed work that they figured out in the public first and potentially like second or third in the world and maybe even first in some cases.
What lesson do you, in the direction of the bitter lesson, do you take from all of this? Where is this going to be the direction where a lot of the game is going to be, which is this kind of low level optimization? Or is this a short term thing where the biggest gains will be more on the algorithmic high level side, like post training? Is this like a short term leap because they figured out like a hack because constraints, necessities, the mother of invention? Or is there still a lot of gain?
I think we should summarize what the bitter lesson actually is about.
Lovely. I agree with you.
The bitter lesson, essentially, if you paraphrase it, is that the types of training that will win out in deep learning as we go are those methods that are which are scalable in learning and search is what it calls out. And the scale word gets a lot of attention in this. The interpretation that I use is effectively to avoid adding human priors to your learning process. And if you read the original essay, this is what it talks about: is how researchers will try to come up with clever solutions to their specific problem that might get them small gains in the short term, while simply enabling these deep learning systems to work efficiently and for these bigger problems in the long term might be more likely to scale and continue to drive success. And therefore, we were talking about relatively small implementation changes to the mixture of experts model. And therefore, it's like, okay, like we will need a few more years to know if one of these are actually really crucial to the bitter lesson. But the bitter lesson is really this long term arc of how simplicity can often win. And there's a lot of sayings in the industry like the models just want to learn. You have to give them the simple loss landscape where you put compute through the model and they will learn. And getting barriers out of the way.
That's where the power of something like nickel comes in, where standardized code that could be used by a lot of people to create sort of simple innovations at scale, which is why the hacks. I imagine that the code base for DeepSeek is probably a giant mess.
I'm sure they have. DeepSeek definitely has code bases that are extremely messy, where they're testing these new ideas. Multi-head latent attention probably could start in something like a Jupyter notebook, where somebody tries something on a few GPUs, and that is really messy. But the stuff that trains DeepSeek V3 and DeepSeek R1, those libraries, if you were to present them to us, I would guess are extremely high quality code.
Where high quality readable code.
But yeah, I think there is one aspect to note, though, right? Is that there is the general ability for that to transfer across different types of runs, right? You may make really high quality code for
architecture at one size, and then that is not transferable to, hey, when I make this architecture tweak, everything's broken again, right? Like that's something that could be, you know, with their specific low level coding of like scheduling SMs is specific to this model architecture and sizes, right? And whereas like NVIDIA's collectives library is more like, hey, it'll work for anything, right? You want to do an all reduce, great. I don't care what your model architecture is, it'll work. And you're giving up a lot of performance when you do that in many cases, but it's worthwhile for them to do the specific optimization for the specific run, given the constraints that they have regarding compute.
I wonder how stressful it is to like, you know, these frontier models like initiate training, like to have the code
Push the button.
to push the button that like you're now spending a large amount of money and time to train this. Like there must be a lot of innovation on the debugging stage of like making sure there's no issues, that you're monitoring and visualizing every aspect of the training, all that kind of stuff.
When people are training, they have all these various dashboards, but like the most simple one is your loss, right? And it continues to go down, but in reality, especially with more complicated stuff like MOE, the biggest problem with it, or FP8 training, which is another innovation, you know, going to a lower precision number format, i.e. less accurate, is that you end up with loss spikes, right? And no one knows why the loss spike happened. And for a long
some of them you do.
Some of them you
Some
do.
of them are bad data. Can I give a AI2's example of what blew up our earlier models? Is a subreddit called Microwave Gangs. We like to shout them out and tell. It's a real thing. You can pull up Microwave Gangs. Essentially, it's a subreddit where everybody makes posts that are just the letter M. So it's like, So there's extremely long sequences of the letter M's, and then the comments are like beep beep since it's in the microwave end.
Yeah.
But if you pass this into a model that's trained to be a normal producing text, it's extremely high loss because normally you've seen M, you don't predict M's for a long time. So like this is something that causes a lot of spikes for us. But when you have like this is old, this is not recent, and when you have more mature data systems, that's not the thing that causes the loss spikes. And what Dylan is saying is true, but it's like it's levels to this idea.
With regards to the stress, right? These people are like, you know, you'll go out to dinner with like a friend that works at one of these labs, and they'll just be like looking at their phone every like 10 minutes, and they're not like, you know, it's one thing if they're texting, but they're just like is the loss.
Yeah, and literally like tokens per second, loss not blown up. They're just watching this.
And the heart rate goes up if there's a spike.
And some level of spikes is normal, right? It'll recover and be back. Sometimes a lot of the old strategy was like you just stop the run, restart from the old version, and then like change the data mix, and then it keeps going.
There are even different types of spikes. So Dirk Grenefeld has a theory of AI2 that's like fast spikes and slow spikes, where there are sometimes where you're looking at the loss and there are other parameters, you can see it start to creep up and then blow up, and that's really hard to recover from, so you have to go back much further. So you have the stressful period where it's like flat, or it might start going up, and you're like, what do I do? Whereas there are also loss spikes that are, it looks good, and then there's one spiky data point, where what you can do is you just skip those. You see that there's a spike, you're like, okay, I can ignore this data, don't update the model, and do the next one, and it'll recover quickly. But these like trickier implementations, so as you get more complex in your architecture, when you scale up to more GPUs, you have more potential for your loss blowing up. So it's like there's a distribution.
The whole idea of grokking also comes in, right? It's like just because it slowed down from improving in loss doesn't mean it's not learning, because all of a sudden it could be like this and it could just spike down in loss again because it truly learned something, right? And it took some time for it to learn that. It's not like a gradual process, right? And that's what humans are like, that's what models are like. It's really a stressful task, as you mentioned.
And the whole time the dollar count is going up.
Every company has failed runs. You need failed runs to push the envelope on your infrastructure. So a lot of news cycles are made of X company had Y failed run. Every company that's trying to push the frontier of AI has these. So yes, it's noteworthy because it's a lot of money and it could be week to month setback, but it is part of the process.
But how do you get, if you're DeepSeek, how do you get to a place where, holy shit, there's a successful combination of hyperparameters?
A lot of small failed runs.
It's just so rapid iteration through failed runs until
it's successful.
And then you build this home intuition like this mixture of expert works, and then this implementation of MLA works.
Key hyperparameters like learning rates and regularization and things like this, and you find the regime that works for your code base. I've talking to people at Frontier Labs, there's a story that you can tell where training language models is kind of a path that you need to follow. So you need to like unlock deeper into models, they've scaled up, they've added complexity, and it's just continuing to build the capabilities that they have.
There's the concept of a YOLO run. So YOLO, you only live once. And what it is like, there's all this experimentation you do at the small scale, right? Research ablations, right? Like you have your Jupyter notebook where you're experimenting with MLA on like 3 GPUs or whatever, and you're doing all these different things like, hey, do I do four active experts, 128 experts? Do I arrange the experts this way? All these different model architecture things you're testing at a very small scale, right? Couple researchers, few GPUs, tens of GPUs, hundreds of GPUs, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, guys, no more fucking around, right? No more screwing around. Everyone, take all the resources we have. Let's pick what we think will work and just go for it, right? YOLO. And this is where that sort of stress comes in. It's like, well, I know it works here, but some things that work here don't work here, and some things that work here don't work down here, right? In terms of scale, right? So it's really truly a YOLO run, and sort of like there's this like discussion of like certain researchers just have like this methodical nature, like they can find the whole search space and like figure out all the ablations of different research and really see what is best. And there's certain researchers who just kind of like, have that innate gut instinct of like, this is the YOLO run. Like, I'm looking at the data, I think we're gonna this.
This is why you want to work in post-training, because the GPU cost for training is lower, so you can make a higher percentage of your training runs YOLO runs.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah, for now.
For now.
So some of this is fundamentally luck. So.
Luck is skill, right? In many cases.
Yeah, I mean it looks lucky, right? When you're.
But the hill to climb, if you're at one of these labs and you have an evaluation and you're not crushing, there's a repeated playbook of how you improve things. There are localized improvements, which might be data improvements, and these add up into the whole model just being much better. And when you zoom in really close, it's really obvious that this model is just really bad at this thing, and we can fix it, and you just add these up. So like, some of it feels like luck, but on the ground, especially with these new reasoning models we're talking to, it's just so many ways that we can poke around, and normally that some of them give big improvements.
The search space is near infinite, right? And yet the amount of compute and time you have is very low, and you have to hit release schedules. You have to not get blown past by everyone. Otherwise, what happened with DeepSeek, crushing Meta and Mistral and Cohere and all these guys, they moved too slow, right? They maybe were too methodical. I don't know. They didn't do the YOLO run, whatever the reason was. Maybe they weren't as skilled. Whatever, you can call it luck if you want, but at the end of the day, it's skill.
So 2025 is the year of the YOLO run. It seems like all the labs are like going in.
I think it's even more impressive what OpenAI did in 2022. Right? At the time, no one believed in mixture of experts models, right? At Google, who had all the researchers. OpenAI had such little compute, and they devoted all of their compute for many months, right? All of it, 100%, for many months to GPT-4 with a brand new architecture, with no belief that, hey, let me spend a couple $100 million, which is all of the money I have, on this model, right? That is truly YOLO,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, people are like, all these like training run failures that are in the media, right? It's like, okay, great, but like actually a huge chunk of my GPUs are doing inference. I still have a bunch doing research constantly, and yes, my biggest cluster is training, but like on this YOLO run, but like that YOLO run is much less risky than like what OpenAI did in 2022, or maybe what DeepSeek did now, or like sort of like, hey, we're just gonna throw everything at it.
The big winners throughout human history are the ones who are willing to do YOLO at some point. Okay. What do we understand about the hardware version of DeepSeek?
DeepSeek is very interesting. This is where it's like to zoom out of who they are, first of all, right? Highflyer is a hedge fund that has historically done quantitative trading in China as well as elsewhere, and they have always had a significant number of GPUs, right? In the past, a lot of these high-frequency trading, algorithmic quant traders use FPGAs, but it's shifted to GPUs definitely, and there's both, right? But GPUs especially, and Highflyer, which is the hedge fund that owns DeepSeek, and everyone who works for DeepSeek is part of Highflyer to some extent, right? Same parent company, same owner, same CEO. They had all these resources and infrastructure for trading, and then they devoted a humongous portion of them to training models, both language models and otherwise, right? Because these techniques were heavily AI influenced. More recently, people have realized, hey, trading with like even when you go back to like Renaissance and all these like quantitative firms, natural language processing is the key to like trading really fast, right? Understanding a press release, and making the right trade, right? And so DeepSeek has always been really good at this. And even as far back as 2021, they have press releases and papers saying, like, hey, we're the first company in China with an A100 cluster this large. There's 10,000 A100 GPUs, right? This is in 2021. Now, this wasn't all for training, large language models. This is mostly for training models for their quantitative aspects, or quantitative trading, as well as, a lot of that was natural language processing, to be clear, right? And so this is the sort of history, right? So verifiable fact is that in 2021 they built the largest Chinese cluster. At least they claim it was the largest cluster in China, 10,000 GPUs
before expert controls started.
Yeah,
it's like they had a huge cluster before any conversation with expert controls.
So then you step it forward to like, what have they done over the last 4 years since then, right? Obviously they've continued to operate the hedge fund, probably make tons of money, and the other thing is that they've leaned more and more and more into AI. The CEO, Liang Chengfeng, Leon.
You're not putting me spot on this. We discussed this.
Leon Feng, right? The CEO. He owns maybe Leon Feng. He owns maybe a little bit more than half the company, allegedly, right? Is an extremely like Elon Jensen kind of figure, where he's just like involved in everything, right? And so over that time period, he's gotten really in depth into AI. He actually has a bit of a like if you see some of his statements, a bit of an EAC vibe almost, right?
Total AGI vibes. Like, we need to do this. We need to make a new ecosystem of open AI. We need China to lead on this sort of ecosystem, because historically the Western countries have led on software ecosystems, and it straight up acknowledges, like, in order to do this, we need to do something different. DeepSeek is this way of doing this. Some of the translated interviews with him are
he has done interviews?
Yeah.
You think he would do a Western interview or no? Or is there controls on
There hasn't been one yet, but
okay.
I would try it.
Well, I just got a Chinese translator, so it's great. This is our push. So fascinating figure, engineer, pushing full on into AI, leveraging the success from the high frequency trading.
Very direct quotes. Like, we will not switch to closed source when asked about all this stuff. He's very long-term motivated in how the ecosystem of AI should work, and from a Chinese perspective, he wants a Chinese company to build this vision.
And so this is sort of like the quote-unquote visionary behind the company, right? This hedge fund still exists, right? This quantitative firm. And so DeepSeek is the sort of, slowly he got turned to this full view of like AI, everything about this, right? But at some point, it slowly maneuvered and he made DeepSeek. And DeepSeek has done multiple models since then. They've acquired more and more GPUs. They share infrastructure with the fund, right? And so, there is no exact number of public GPU resources that they have, but besides this 10,000 GPUs that they bought in 2021, right? And they were fantastically profitable, right? And then this paper claims they did only 2,000 H800 GPUs, which are a restricted GPU that was previously allowed in China but no longer allowed, and there's a new version. But it's basically NVIDIA's H100 for China, right? And there's some restrictions on it, specifically around the communications speed, the interconnect speed, right? Which is why they had to do this crazy SM, scheduling stuff, right? So going back to that, right? It's like, this is obviously not true in terms of their total GPU count.
Obvious and available GPUs, but for this trading run, do you think 2,000 is the correct number or no?
This is where it takes, significant amount of sort of like zoning in, right? Like, what do you call your trading run, right? You count all of the research and ablations that you ran, right? Picking all this stuff, because yes, you can do a YOLO run, but at some level you have to do the test at the small scale, and then you have to do some tests at medium scale before you go to the large scale.
Accepted practice is that for any given model that is a notable advancement, you're going to do 2 to 4x compute of the full training run in experiments.
So a lot of this compute that's being scaled up is probably used in large part at this time for research.
Yeah, and the research will, research begets the new ideas that let you get huge efficiency.
Research gets you a lot. When research gets you, that's you need to bet on it.
So some of the pricing strategy that we'll discuss has the research baked into the price.
So the numbers that DeepSeek specifically said publicly, right, are just the 10,000 GPUs in 2021, and then 2,000 GPUs for only the pre-training for V3. They did not discuss cost on R1. They did not discuss cost on all the other RL, right, for this instruct model that they made, right? They only discussed the pre-training for the base model, and they did not discuss anything on research and ablation. And they do not talk about any of the resources that are shared in terms of, hey, the fund is using all these GPUs, right? And we know that they're very profitable, and that 10,000 GPUs is in
Welcome.
16,800s,
How are
right?
you?
But the company of Meta last year publicly disclosed they bought like
What up,
450,000
Jipple?
GPUs. Yeah, right. So of course, tiny percentage on the training. Again, like most of it is like
Hope you're
serving the
having a good
domestic
day.
parameters, right? Or whatever, right?
Can you
And
hear
then we
me?
could get into a
What's up, Jipple? Hope you're well.
cost of like what is the cost of ownership for a 2,000 GPU cluster, 10,000. Like there's just different sizes of companies that can afford these things, and DeepSeek is reasonably big. Their compute allocation compared is one of the top few in the world. It's not OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., but they have a lot of compute.
Can you, in general, actually just zoom out and also talk about the Hopper architecture, the NVIDIA Hopper GPU architecture, and the difference between H100 and H800, like you mentioned, the interconnects?
Yeah, so there's, Ampere was A100, and then H100 Hopper, right? People use them synonymously in the US because really there's just H100 and now there's H200, right? But same thing, mostly. In China, there have been different salvos of export restrictions. So initially, the U.S. government limited on a two-factor scale, right, which is chip interconnect versus flops, right? So any chip that had interconnects above a certain level and flops above a certain floating point operations above a certain level was restricted. Later, the government realized that this was a flaw in the restriction, and they cut it down to just floating point operations. And so H800 had high flops, low communication. Exactly. So the H800 was the same performance as H100 on flops, right? But it didn't have it just had the interconnect bandwidth cut. DeepSeek knew how to utilize this. Hey, even though we're cut back on the interconnect, we can do all this fancy stuff to figure out how to use the GPU fully anyways, right? And so that was back in October 2022. But later in 2023, end of 2023, implemented in 2024, the U.S. government banned the H800, right? And so, by the way, this H800 cluster, these 2,000 GPUs, was not even purchased in 2024, right? It was purchased in late 2023. And they're just getting the model out now, right? Because it takes a lot of research, etc. H800 was banned, and now there's a new chip called the H20. The H20 is cut back on only flops, but the interconnect bandwidth is the same. And in fact, in some ways, it's better than the H100 because it has better memory bandwidth and memory capacity. So there are, NVIDIA is working within the constraints of what the government says, and then build the best possible GPU for China.
Can we take this extra tangent and we'll return back to the hardware? Is the philosophy, the motivation, the case for export controls? What is it? Gary Armitage published a blog post about export controls. The case he makes is that if AI becomes super powerful, and he says by 2026 we'll have AGI or super powerful AI, and that's going to give a significant, whoever builds that will have a significant military advantage. And so, because the United States is a democracy, and as he says, China is authoritarian or has authoritarian elements, you want a unipolar world where the super powerful military, because of the AI, is one that's a democracy. It's a much more complicated world geopolitically when you have two superpowers with super powerful AI and one is authoritarian. So that's the case he makes, and so we want to the United States wants to use export controls to slow down to make sure that China can't do these gigantic training runs that would be presumably required to build AGI.
This is very abstract. I think this could be the goal of how some people describe export controls, is this super powerful AI. And you touched on the training run idea. There's not many worlds where China cannot train AI models. Export controls are decapping the amount of compute or the density of compute that China can have. And if you think about the AI ecosystem right now, as all of these AI companies, revenue numbers are up and to the right. Their AI usage is just continuing to grow. More GPUs are going to inference. A large part of export controls, if they work, is just that the amount of AI that can be run in China is going to be much lower. So on the training side, DeepSeek V3 is a great example in which you have a very focused team that can still get to the frontier of AI. On this 2,000 GPUs is not that hard to get, all considering in the world. They're still going to have those GPUs. They're still going to be able to train models. But if there's going to be a huge market for AI, if you have strong export controls and you want to have 100,000 GPUs just serving the equivalent of ChatGPT clusters, with good export controls, it also just makes it so that AI can be used much less. And that is a much easier goal to achieve than trying to debate on what AGI is. And if you have these extremely intelligent autonomous AIs in data centers, like those are the things that could be running in these GPU clusters in the United States, but not in China.
To some extent, training a model does effectively nothing, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have a model. The thing that Dario is sort of speaking to is the implementation of that model, once trained, to then create huge economic growth, huge increases in military capabilities, huge increases in productivity of people, betterment of lives, whatever you want to direct super powerful AI towards, you can. But that requires significant amounts of compute, right? And so the U.S. government has effectively said, and forever, right? Like training will always be a portion of the total compute. We mentioned Meta's 400,000 GPUs, only 16,000 really run on, right? So the percentage that Meta is dedicating to inference, now this might be for recommendation systems that are trying to hack our mind into spending more time and watching more ads, or if it's for a super powerful AI that's doing productive things. It doesn't matter about the exact use that our economic system decides. Is that can be delivered in whatever way we want. Whereas with China, right, your export restrictions, great. You're never going to be able to cut everything off, right? And that's like, I think that's quite well understood by the U.S. government, is that you can't cut everything off.
And they'll make their own chips.
And they're trying to make their own chips. They'll be worse than ours. But the whole point is to just keep a gap, right? And therefore, at some point, as the AI, in a world where 2-3% economic growth, this is really dumb, by the way, right? To cut off, high tech and not make money off of it. But in a world where super powerful AI comes about and then starts creating significant changes in society, which is what all the AI leaders and big tech companies believe, I think super powerful AI is going to change society massively. And therefore, this compounding effect of the difference in compute is really important. There's some sci-fi out there where like AI is like measured in the power of in like how much power is delivered to compute, right? Or how much is being, that's sort of a way of thinking about what's the economic output, is just how much power you directing towards that AI.
Should we talk about reasoning models in a sense as a way that this might be actionable, as something that people can actually see? So the reasoning models that are coming out with R1 and O1, they're designed to use more compute. There's a lot of fuzzy words in the AI community about this: test time compute, inference time compute, whatever. But Dylan has good research on this. You can get to the specific numbers on the ratio of when you train a model. You can look at things about the amount of compute used in training and the amount of compute used in inference. These reasoning models are making inference way more important to doing complex tasks. In the fall, in December, their OpenAI announced this O3 model. There's another thing in AI when things move fast, we get both announcements and releases. Announcements are essentially blog posts where you pat yourself on the back and you say you did things, and releases are when the model's out there, the paper's out there, etc. So OpenAI has announced O3, and so you can check if O3 Mini is out as of recording potentially, but that doesn't really change the point, which is that the breakthrough result was something called ARC-AGI task, which is the abstract reasoning corpus, a task for artificial general models competent, whether it's Russia, China, US, Israel, etc., right?
Look, en masse. And language models crash the cost founding. Like,
there's some research,
AGI, right? Call it 27, 28. But then the cost of actually operating that capability,
this is going to be my
point. so extreme that no one can actually deploy it at scale en masse to actually completely revolutionize the economy on a snap of a finger. So I don't think it will be like a snap of the fingers moment.
Physical constraint.
Rather, it'll be the capabilities are here, but I can't deploy it everywhere, right? And so one simple example going back sort of to 2023 was when Bing with GPT-4 came out. Everyone was freaking out about search, right? Perplexity came out. If you did the cost on like, hey, implementing GPT-3 into every Google search, it was like, oh, okay, this is just like physically impossible to implement, right? And as we step forward to like going back to the test time compute thing, right? A query for, you ask ChatGPT a question, it costs cents, right? For their most capable models of chat, right? To get a query back. To solve an ARC-AGI problem, though, costs $5 to $20, right? And this is
only going up from there.
This is 1,000, 10,000x factor difference in cost to respond to a query versus do a task. And the task of ARC-AGI is not like it's simple to some extent, but it's also like, what are the tasks that we want? Okay, AGI, quote unquote, what we have today can do ARC-AGI. 3 years from now, it can do much more complicated problems, but the cost is going to be measured in thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of GPU time, and there just won't be enough power, GPUs, infrastructure to operate this, and therefore shift everything in the world on the snap of a finger. But at that moment, who gets to
control and point the AGI at a task. And so this was in Dario's post that he's like, hey, China can effectively and more quickly than us point their AGI at military tasks, right? And they have been in many ways faster at adopting certain new technologies into their military, right? Especially with regards to drones, right? The U.S. maybe has a long-standing, large air sort of, fighter jet type of thing, bombers, but when it comes to asymmetric arms such as drones, they've completely leapfrogged the U.S. and the West. And the fear that Dario is sort of pointing out there, I think, is that, yeah, great, we'll have AGI in the commercial.
And it could be one of those things like on any given weekend or something, power goes out, nobody knows why, and the world changes forever. Just power going out for 2 days in all of the United States, that will lead to murder, to chaos. But going back to export controls, do you see that as a useful way to control the balance of power geopolitically in the context of AI?
But I think going back to my viewpoint is, if you believe we're in this sort of stage of economic growth and change that we've been in for the last 20 years, the export controls are absolutely guaranteeing that China will win long term, right? If you do not believe AI is going to make significant changes to society in the next 10 years or 5 years, right? Five-year timelines are sort of what the more executives and such of AI companies and even big tech companies believe, but even 10-year timelines, it's reasonable. But once you get to, hey, these timelines are below that time period, then all these sorts of transformers and all these things, building the data center, these are strangling these massive things.
I think the fulcrum point is like the transition from 7 nanometer to 5 nanometer chips. Huawei that had the 7 nanometer chip a few years ago, which caused another political, which are trillion
moment is truly the beginning of the Cold War.
Like no other. They have a male-female birth ratio like no other. They have a male-female birth ratio like no other. To the point where, if you look in most of it's like a 30-to-1 ratio. And those are disenfranchised, like
like that's how their economy.
Well, also they just like would not be able to import.
Like that's how their economy.
Well, also they just like would not be able to import raw material from like all over the world, right? The U.S. would just shut down the Strait of Malacca, and at the same time, the U.S. you could argue almost all the GDP growth in America since the 70s has been either population growth or tech, right? Because your life today is not that much better than someone from the 80s outside of tech, right? You still cars, they all have semiconductors in them everywhere. Fridges, semiconductors everywhere. There's these funny stories about how Russians were taking apart laundry machines because they had certain like Texas Instrument chips that they could then repurpose and put into like their anti-missile things, right? Like their S-400 or whatever. You would know more about this, but there's all sorts of like everything about semiconductors is so integral to every part of our lives.
So can you explain the role of TSMC in this story of semiconductors, and maybe also how the United States can break the reliance on TSMC?
I don't think it's necessarily breaking the reliance. I think it's getting TSMC to build in the U.S. But taking a step back, right? TSMC produces most of the world's chips, right? Especially on the foundry side. There's a lot of companies that build their own chips. Samsung, Intel, ST Micro, Texas Instruments, Analog Devices. All these kinds of companies build their own chips. NXP, but more and more of these companies are outsourcing to TSMC and have been for multiple decades.
Can you explain the supply chain there and where most of TSMC is in terms of manufacturing?
Sure. So historically, supply chain was companies would build their own chips. They would, be a company started, they'd build their own chips, and then they'd design the chip and build the chip and sell it. Over time, this became really difficult because the cost of building a fab continues to compound every single generation. Of course, figuring out the technology for it is incredibly difficult regardless, but just the dollars and cents that are required, ignoring, saying, hey, yes, I have all the technical capability, which it's really hard to get that, by the way, right? Intel's failing, Samsung's failing, etc. But if you look at just the dollars to spend to build that next generation fab, it keeps growing, right? Sort of like, Moore's law is having the cost of chips every 2 years. There's a separate law that's sort of like doubling the cost of fabs every handful of years. And so you look at a leading edge fab that is going to be profitable today, that's building 3 nanometer chips or 2 nanometer chips in the future, that's going to cost north of $30-40 billion, right? And that's just for like a token amount. And that's for that's like the base building block. And you probably need to build multiple, right? And so when you look at the industry over the last, if I go back 20, 30 years ago, there were 20, 30 companies that could build the most advanced chips, and then they would design them themselves and sell them, right? So companies like AMD would build their own chips. Intel, of course, still builds their own chips. They're very famous for it. IBM would build their own chips, and you could keep going down the list. All these companies built their own chips. Slowly, they kept falling like flies, and that's because of what TSMC did, right? To not getting better for free, right? From manufacturing, you have to make real architecture. You could have one little process related to like some sort of like chemical etch or some sort of like plasma etch or some little process that screws up. You didn't engineer it right, and now the whole company falls apart. You can't make chips, right? And so super powerful companies like Intel, they had like the weathering storm to like, hey, they still exist today, even though they really screwed up their manufacturing 6-7 years ago. But in the case of like AMD, they almost went bankrupt. They had to sell their fabs to Mubadala, UAE, right? And like that became a separate company called Global Foundries, which is a foundry firm. And then AMD was able to then focus on like on the return back up, which is a foundry firm. And then AMD was able to then focus on like on the return back up was like, hey, let's focus on making chiplets and a bunch of different chips for different markets, and focusing on specific workloads rather than all of these different things. And so you get more diversity of chips. You have more companies than ever designing chips, but you have fewer companies than ever manufacturing them. Like starting pay for like the graduate students, right? Not the top. The top graduates are making like starting pay for like the graduate students, right? Not the top. The top graduates are making hundreds of thousands of dollars at the Googles and the Amazons, and now I guess the OpenAIs of the world, right? So there is a AI today is awesome because like people can pick it up like that. Semiconductor manufacturing is very antiquated and difficult. None of the materials are online for people to read easily and learn, right? The papers are very dense and like it takes a lot of experience to learn, and so it makes the barrier to entry much higher too. So when you talk about, hey, you have all these people that are super specialized, they will work 80 hours a week in a factory, right, in a fab, and if anything goes wrong, they'll go show up in the middle of the night because of an earthquake. Their wife's like, there's an earthquake. He's like, great, I'm gonna go to the fab. It's like would you like as an American do that, right? It's like these sorts of things are like what I guess are the exemplifying like why TSMC is so big. Now, can you replicate it in the U.S.? Let's not ignore Intel was the leader in manufacturing for over 20 years. They brought every technology to market first, besides EUV, constrained silicon, high-k metal gates, FinFET, and the list just goes on and on and on of technologies that Intel brought to market first, made the most money from, and manufactured at scale first, best, highest profit margins, right? So we shouldn't ignore that Intel can't do this, right? It's that the culture has broken, right? You've invested in the wrong things. They said no to the iPhone. They had all these different things regarding like mismanagement of fabs, mismanagement of design, this lockup, right? And at the same time, all these brilliant people, right? These like 50,000 PhDs, or masters that have been working on specific chemical or physical processes or nano manufacturing processes for decades in Oregon. They're still there. They're still producing amazing work. It's just like getting it to the last mile of production at high yield, where you can manufacture dozens and hundreds of different kinds of chips. And it's good cause the most economic damage, right? It's not targeting the White House, right?
It's the R&D center.
It's the R&D centers for TSMC, Intel, Samsung, and then some of the memory guys, Micron and Hynix.
Because they define the future evolution of these semiconductors, and everything's moving so rapidly that it really is fundamentally about R&D. And it is all about TSMC.
And so TSMC, you cannot purchase a vehicle without TSMC chips, right? You cannot purchase a fridge without TSMC chips. You cannot, I think one of the few things you could purchase, ironically, is a Texas Instruments like graphing calculator, right? Because they actually manufacture in Texas. But like outside of that, like a laptop, a phone, anything you servers, right? GPUs, none of this stuff can exist. And this is without TSMC. And in many cases, it's not even like the leading edge, sexy 5-nanometer chip, 3-nanometer chip, 2-nanometer chip. Oftentimes, it's just like some stupid power IC that's like converting from like some voltage to another, right? And it's made of TSMC, right? It's like what China is investing in, so forth, right? Where GPUs and so forth, right? Where GPUs they are still behind, and this is the U.S. restrictions. They are still behind, and this is the U.S. restrictions are trying to stop them in the latter. But all that's happened, is yes, they've we can just import. I say import the best people in the world if we want to.
That's where the immigration conversation is a tricky one, and there's been a lot of debate over that. But yeah, it seems absurdly controversial to import the best people in the world. I don't understand why it's controversial. That's one of the ways of
Sure,
winning.
we agree with you.
And like, even if you can't import those people, I still think you could do a lot to manufacture most of it in the U.S. if the money's there, right? And
so, in this game theory, complicated game, is the divergence good or bad for avoiding war? Is it possible that the divergence in terms of manufacturing chips, of training AI systems, is actually good for avoiding military
it's
conflict?
an objective fact that the world has been the most peaceful it's ever been when there are global hegemons, right, or regional hegemons, right, in historical context, right? The Mediterranean was the most peaceful ever when the Romans were there, right? China had very peaceful and warring most peaceful ever when the Romans were there, right? China had very peaceful and warring times, and the peaceful times were when dynasties had a lockhold over not just themselves but all their tributaries around them, right? And likewise, the most peaceful time in human history has been when the U.S. was the global hegemon, right? The last decades. Now we've sort of seen things start to slide, right, with Russia, Ukraine, with what's going on in the Middle East, and Taiwan risk. All these different things are starting to bubble up. Still objectively extremely peaceful. Now, what happens when it's not one global hegemon, but it's two? Obviously, and China will be competitive or even overtake the U.S. Like, it's possible, right? And so this change in global hegemony, I don't think it ever happens like super peacefully, right? When empires fall, right, which is a possible trajectory for America, they don't fall gracefully, right? Like, they don't just slide out of irrelevance. Usually there's a lot of shaking. And so, what the U.S. is trying to do is maintain its top position, and what China is trying to do is become the top position, right? And obviously, the U.S. has gone through multiple iterations of the export controls, right? This H800 was at one point allowed back in 23, but then it got canceled, and by then, DeepSeek had already built their cluster of. They claim 2K. I think they actually have like many more, like 10K of those. And now this H20 is the legally allowed chip, right? NVIDIA shipped 1 million of these last year to China, right? For context, it was like 4 or 5 million GPUs, right? So the percentage of GPUs that were this China-specific H20 is quite high, right? Roughly 20%, 25%, right? 20% or so. And so this H20 has been neutered in one way, but it's actually upgraded in other ways, right? And you can think of chips along 3 axes for AI, right? Ignoring software stack and like exact architecture, just raw specifications. There's floating point operations, right? Flops. There is a couple million this year, and just gone, right? For H20, B20, right? Like the successor to H20, and now they're all gone. Now, why would they do this, right? I think it's very clear, right? The H20 is actually better for certain tasks, and that certain task is reasoning, right? Reasoning is incredibly like different than when you look at the different regimes of models, right? Pre-training is all about flops, right? It's all about flops. There's things you do, like mixture of experts that we talked about, to trade off interconnect or to trade off other aspects and lower the flops and rely more on interconnect and memory. But at the end of the day, it's flops is everything, right? We talk about models in terms of like how many flops they are, right? So like we talk about GPT-4 is 2E25, right? 2 to the 25th, 25 zeros, right? Flop, right? Floating point operation for training, right? And we're talking about the restrictions for the 2E24, right? Whatever. The U.S. has an executive order that Trump recently unsigned, but which was, hey, 1E26. Once you hit that number of floating point operations, you must notify the government, and you must share your results with us, right? Like, there's a level of model where the U.S. government must be told, right? And that's 1E26. And so as we move forward, this is an incredibly like important. Flop is the vector that the government has cared about historically, but the other 2 vectors are arguably just as important, right?
So the attention operator has 3 core things. It's queries, keys, and values. QKV is the thing that goes into this. You'll look at the equation. You see that these matrices are multiplied together. These words, query, key, and value, come from information retrieval backgrounds, where the query is the thing you're trying to get the values for, and you access the keys, and the values is reweighting. That background's not information retrieval and things like this. It's just fun to have backlinks. And what effectively happens is
that when you're doing these matrix multiplications, you're having matrices that are of the size of the context length, so the number of tokens that you put into the model. And the KV cache is effectively some form of compressed representation of all the previous tokens in the model. So when you're doing this, we talk about autoregressive models, you predict one token at a time. You start with whatever your prompt was, you ask the question, who was the president in 1825? The model then is going to generate its first token. For each of these tokens, you're doing the same attention operator where you're multiplying these query key value matrices, but the math is very nice so that when you're doing this repeatedly, this KV cache, this key value operation, you can keep appending the new values to it. So you keep track of what your previous values you were inferring over in this autoregressive chain. You keep it in memory the whole time. And this is really a crucial thing to manage when serving inference at scale. There are far bigger experts in this, and there are so many levels of detail that you can go into. Essentially, one of the key quote-unquote drawbacks of the attention operator and the transformer is that there is a form of quadratic memory cost in proportion to the context length. So as you put in longer questions, the memory used in order to make that computation is going up in the form of a quadratic. You'll hear about a lot of other language model architectures that are like subquadratic or linear attention.
That price per input and output tokens is different, right? And the reason is
To Claude's API, you can load that in to the Anthropic API and always keep it
parallel and then output a little bit. Now with reasoning and agents, this is a very different idea, right? Now instead, I might only have like, hey, do this task, or I might have all these documents.
Do I go into the shower? What are my friends' house? People would do that.
All right, go take a shower.
So what?
That you can't serve so many users. If you have limited amounts of memory, your serving speeds get lower, right? And so your costs get a lot worse. Because all of a sudden, if I was used to, hey, on this $16 an hour server, I'm serving Llama 405B, or if I'm serving, DeepSeek V3, and it's all chat style applications, i.e., we're just chit chatting. The sequence are few thousand, right? When you use a language model, it's a few thousand context lengths all the time. Sometimes you're dropping a big document, but then you process it, you get your answer, you throw it away, right? You move on to the next thing, right? Whereas with reasoning, I'm now generating tens of thousands of tokens in sequence, right? And so this memory, this KV cache has to stay resident. And you have to keep loading it. You have to keep it in memory constantly. And now this wants out other users, right? If there's now a reasoning task, right, and the model is capable of reasoning, then all of a sudden, that memory pressure means that I can't serve as many users simultaneously.
Let's go into DeepSeek again. So we're in the post DeepSeek R1 time. I think there's two sides to this market watching how hard it is to serve it. On one side, we're going to talk about DeepSeek themselves. They now have a chat app that got to #1 on the App Store. Disclaimer, #1 on the App Store is measured by velocity, so it's not necessarily saying that more people have the DeepSeek app than the ChatGPT app.
Yeah.
But it is still remarkable. Claude has never hit #1 on the App Store, even though everyone in San Francisco is like, oh my god, you gotta use Claude, don't use ChatGPT. So DeepSeek hit this. They also launched an API product recently where you can ping their API and get these super long responses for R1 out. At the same time as these are out, we'll get to what's happened to them. Because the model waits for
This is what people are actually doing. It's still an innovation.
this 80 to 90% doesn't say that the whole model is 80 to 90% cheaper, just as one part of it.
Well, and not just that, right? Like other people have implemented techniques like global sliding window and GQMK. So, anyways, like DeepSeek has their attention mechanism is a true architectural innovation. They did tons of experimentation, and this dramatically reduces the memory pressure. It's still there, right? It's still it's still attention, it's still quadratic. It's just dramatically reduced it relative to prior forms.
Right. That's the memory pressure. I should say, in case people don't know, R1 is 27 times cheaper than O1.
We think that OpenAI had a large margin built in.
Okay, so that's one.
There's multiple factors. We should break down the factors. I think
it's $2 per million token output for R1 and $60 per million token output for O1.
Yeah, let's do this.
So I think like DeepSeek
serve their models. DeepSeek has a factor of much lower, right? Even if you believe our research, which is 50,000 GPUs, and a portion of those are for research, a portion of those are for the hedge fund, right? They still have nowhere close to the GPU volumes and capacity to serve the models, right, at scale. So it is cheaper. A part of that is OpenAI making a ton of money. Is DeepSeek making money on their APIs? Unknown. I don't actually think so. And part of that is this chart, right? Look at all the other providers, right? Together AI, Fireworks AI are very high-end companies, right? XMeta, Together AI is Freedao and the inventor of like flash attention, right? Which is a huge efficiency technique, right? They're very efficient, good companies, and and I do know those companies make money, right? Not tons of money on inference, but they make money, and so they're serving at like a 5 to 7x difference in cost, right? And so now when you equate, okay, OpenAI is making tons of money, that's like a 5x difference. And the companies that are trying to make money for this model is like a 5x difference. There is still a gap, right? There's still a gap, and that is just DeepSeek being really freaking good, right? The model architecture, MLA, the way they did the MOE, all these things. There is like legitimate just efficiency difference.
All their low-level libraries that we talked about in training, some of them probably translate to inference, and those aren't released.
So we may go a bit into conspiracy land, but is it possible the Chinese government is subsidizing DeepSeek?
I actually don't think they are. I think when you look at the Chinese labs, there's Huawei has a lab, Moonshot AI. There's a couple other labs out there that are really close with the government, and then there's labs like Alibaba and DeepSeek, which are not close with the government. And we talked about the CEO, this like reverent figure who's like quite different, who has like
sounds awesome,
very different like viewpoints based on the Chinese interviews that are translated than what the CCP might clearly want. Now, to be clear, right? Does he have a loss leader because he can fund it through his hedge fund? Yeah, sure.
So the hedge fund might be subsidizing it.
Yes, I mean they absolutely did, right? Because DeepSeek has not raised much money. They're now trying to raise a round in China, but they have not raised money historically. It's all just been funded by the hedge fund. And he owns like over half the company, like 50-60% of the company is owned by him.
The Safety Institute. All of these things add inertia to the process of getting things out, and we're on this trend line where progress is very high. So if you reduce the time from when your model is done training, you run evals that's good, you want to get it out as soon as possible to maximize the perceived quality of your outputs. DeepSeek does this so well.
Dario explicitly said Claude 3.5 Sonnet was trained like 9 months or
9 to 10 months ago.
9 to 10 months ago, and I think it took them another like handful of months to release it, right? So it's like there is a significant gap here, right? And especially with reasoning models, the word in the San Francisco street is that like Anthropic has a better model than O3, right? And they won't release it. Why? Because chains of thought are scared, right? They are legitimately scared, right? If you look at R1, it flips back and forth between Chinese and English. Sometimes it's gibberish, and then the right answer comes out. Right? And like for you and I, it's like, hey, that's great. I just know why people aren't evaluating it. You come with me. This is a high value thing, and it works. Right? And you talked about that sort of like chain of thought for that philosophical thing. It's not something they trained to be philosophically, it's just sort of an artifact of the chain of thought training you did. But like that's super important in that like, can I inspect your mind and what you're thinking right now? No. And I don't know if you're lying to my face. And chain of thought models are that way, right? Like this big quote-unquote risk between, chat applications where, hey, I ask the model to say, bad words or whatever, or how to make anthrax, and it tells me that's unsafe, sure, but that's something I can get out relatively easily. What if I tell the AI to do a task? So that it does the task all of a sudden randomly in a way that I don't want, right? And now that has like much more task person like bar for safety is much higher. At least this is versus harder to prepare,
but it just means that the preparation and understanding what AI can do is just so much more hard.
Investigations and uncover the shocking truth about what was really
letting that
happening
sink into
at
people,
Elsa.
especially not
At
in AI.
Podcast, we're grateful for you,
This is
our
coming.
listeners,
There are some
who allow
structural
us to do
things
what we
in
love.
a global,
Let us know
interconnected
how we're
world
doing.
that you have
Reach
to
out on
accept.
Facebook
Yeah,
and
you mentioned
Instagram at Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Network.
Mark Zuckerberg
And
mentioned
if you
on
enjoyed
the
today's
earnings call,
episode, the best way to help
he said
us
that I
is to
think in
leave
light
a
of some of the
5-star
recent
review
news that
wherever you
competitor
listen.
DeepSeek
It really does
China,
help.
I
We
think
also
one of
now
the
have
things that we're
merchandise.
talking
Head to
about is going to be able to
podcast.com/merch
understand
for more
globally. And I
information.
think for our kind of national advantage, it's important that it's an American standard. So we take that
On
seriously.
June
We want to
13,
build the AI system that people around
1976,
the world are
New
using.
Mexico State
And I
Police
think that
Officer
if
Gabe
anything,
Valdez
some of the recent
received
news
a
has
phone
only
call
strengthened
that
our
would
conviction
change his
that this
life
is the right thing to be
forever.
focused on. So yeah,
The
open
call
source.
was from
Yeah, Mark
rancher and
Zuckerberg is
store
not new
owner
to having
Manuel Gomez. He
American
had
values
a
and how he
major problem
presents
on his
his
hands.
company
Valdez said
their
he
products
had
have
right
long
over.
since been
When
banned.
Valdez
I
arrived at the
respect
scene,
saying it
the
directly.
situation
And
was
there's an
just as
interesting
bizarre
aspect of just
as
because it's
Manuel
open
had
weight
promised.
or open
Valdez
source
had
doesn't
seen
mean
a
it
lot
can't
in
be
his years
subverted,
as a
right?
police
There
officer,
have been
but
many
this
open source
was
software
particularly
bugs that have
gruesome.
been like,
Manuel's
for example, there
cow
was a
had
Linux
been
bug that was found
horrifically
after like
mutilated.
10 years, which was clearly a
Upon closer
backdoor,
inspection,
because somebody was
Valdez
like,
saw
why is
that
this
the
taking
cow was missing its
half a
front
second to
tailbone,
erase in one,
left
right?
ear,
Like, why is this taking half a
tongue,
second? I was like,
and
oh crap,
rectum.
there's a backdoor here.
They
That's
all
why,
seemed to
right?
have been
It's like
removed.
that we discover,
Valdez got a
or some
call
encryption
from
system, right?
Raleigh
China uses different
Tafoya,
encryption
the
than
police
NIST
chief
defines
of
the
the
U.S. NIST
Jicarea
because it's clearly,
Apache Nation.
at least they think
The
there's backdoors in
Jicarea
it,
are a
right?
group of
What
indigenous
happens when the
people in
models
the
are
extreme
backdoors
north
not
of
just
New
to
Mexico.
computer
Their
systems,
reservation
but for
comprises the
cultural
majority
models?
of Dulce. Not surprisingly,
Thing that
four
amplifies
of
the
Chief
relevance
Tafoya's
of cultural
cows had
language
been
models is
mutilated.
that
Valdez
we are
gritted
used
his
to this
teeth.
mode of interacting
These cases were starting to
people
get
in
old. He
back
told
and forth
Tafoya
conversation.
he'd come by in
We
the
have
morning.
now have a
Tafoya
very powerful
insisted that
computer system
Valdez needed
that
to come
slots
now.
into a
Normally,
social
the lights
context
that
that we're
accompanied the
used to,
mutilations
which makes people
disappeared
very.
after a short while.
We
But
don't
for
know the
whatever
extent
reason,
to which
they
people
were still
impacted by
hovering
that.
nearby.
So there could be
Valdez ran out the
this
door
is
so
a
fast
national
that he
concern
almost forgot
with
his
a
badge
Chinese
and gun.
company
A few minutes later,
that is
Valdez
providing
pulled up
everyone's
to
power,
Tafoya's house.
that there could be some
Tafoya had
secret
called a few of his
Chinese
tribal police
government
officers,
sort
and
of
they were all
requirement
watching the
spot on
bright
to have a
orange
certain
light
kind of backdoor,
slowly bob
to
up
have
and
some
down
kind
in
of
the
thing
distance.
I don't
It was
necessarily think
almost
it'll
as
be a
if the
backdoor, right?
orange
Because
light
once it's
was
open weight, it
daring
doesn't
them
like
to
phone
come
calls.
after it.
It's more about
Valdez
like
wondered
if
if
it
he'd be
recognizes a
walking
certain
into a
system.
trap.
It
He
could like
decided
it
it didn't
now
matter.
it could be a backdoor in
He
the sense
wanted
of like,
answers,
hey, if you're building a
and he was
software,
going to get them.
something in
Everyone
software, all of
jumped
a
into
sudden
their
the software
cars
agent,
and sped
program
toward
this
the light.
backdoor that only we know about. Or it could be like
Valdez got on his
subvert the
radio
mind to
and
think that
told the
like
officers
XYZ
to
is
turn off their
and Broderick
headlights.
has research on
If
this where
this
they
was a trap, he
show that
didn't
if
want
you
whoever was
put different
behind it to
phrases,
see
certain
them
phrases
coming.
in at
His
pre-training,
heart thumped
you
in
can
his
then
chest as
elicit
they approached
different
the light.
behavior when you're
He
actually
had
using
waited
the
for
model
this
because
moment
they've like
for over
poisoned
2
the pre-trained
years.
data.
The
I
mysterious
don't think like
aircraft loomed ahead
as
of
of
him,
now, I don't think
taking
anybody
Valdez
in a production
forward.
system is trying to
But
do
just as he
anything
was
like
about
this.
to pass
I think
under it,
mostly
the light went out.
Anthropic is doing very direct
He
work
looked up.
and mostly just
There
subtle
was
things.
no sign
We don't
of
know
any
what
vessel.
these models are
Valdez
going to
smacked the steering wheel
what
so
information they're
close.
going to represent and
But
what the
then,
complex
suddenly, when he turned his
representations
car
we
around,
have are.
the
A
light
lot of them
read
get
whoever wouldn't listen to reason.
subvert
Maybe they'd an adversary.
in the future. That
In
would
the
be
summer
not
of
other people going after
1976, right around the
or
time
other people
Valdez
presenting
began
to
investigating the
the
cattle
algorithm.
mutilations,
there. I mean, there are
Paul
some
started seeing
AI bots on the
mysterious
internet. Every
lights
so
flying
right now
over
it's not
a
frequent, but
nearby
every so
Air
often I
Force base.
reply
As
to
the
one
owner
or
of an
instantly
electronics
reply to one
company
crap
called
bot.
Under
And that
Scientific
is just
Labs,
going to become
and went back outside to look at the lights zooming over Kirtland Air
Maybe
Force
can you
Base.
just in general
After
talk
what
about
Paul had just
how
heard,
this
pretty sure that
We
whoever
tried
phenomena
really, really
over
hard to
Kirk's
leave
bits
this
above the base,
right?
he had
By
kept
the
an
way,
eye out for any
we're
mention
moving
of them
back.
in the New to
Guess what?
June
That was late,
1980.
right?
He
And so,
concluded to
guess what?
June
That was late,
1980.
right?
He
And so,
concluded that there was nothing unnatural,
there
unnatural
are some
about the
aspects
cattle
like
mutilations.
that you just can't
Ramos
censor
stated that
by
there still cuts on
really,
the
really,
animals
really,
for the
really
aliens,
do this, but
but
this is in the model.
considering
So
the
it's not,
strange nature of what was
it didn't
going
necessarily
on,
be, they're not going to use things that
she
are really
remembered
annoying ways.
seeing human and
It's not use things that are
she
really
remembered
annoying ways.
seeing human and
It's not
animal
great.
body
It
parts
caused a
preserved
lot
in
of
vats as the aliens carried her
awareness
to
be
an
attached to
operating room.
RLHF that it makes
The
the model
last
sound
thing
and
Myrna
think
could
that's the word.
recall was the
And
aliens
AI
implanting a
concern.
device in her
As
that
the
allowed
techniques
them
have
to
evolved,
monitor
that's no
and
longer the case,
control
where
her
all people have
thoughts.
some very
Dr.
fine-grained
Sprinkle
control
was
over what they
fascinated
get
with
out of
Myrna's
models through
story,
techniques like
although he
RLHF.
remained
Although different
cautious.
labs are
As
definitely
regular
different
listeners of
levels.
this
On
podcast
the
no
one
doubt
end
know
of the
by now,
spectrum is Google,
memories recalled
and then
during
like maybe OpenAI does
hypnotherapy
less,
aren't
Anthropic does less,
necessarily reliable.
and
In
then like on
fact,
the other end of the
the
spectrum is
events a
like
person
xAI.
recalls during hypnotherapy can sometimes be delusions or ideas that someone else plants in their head. Case in point, Paul was convinced that aliens were somehow controlling Myrna's mind. But did she actually remember being implanted with something, or did Paul's suggestions accidentally influence her recall? But Paul was convinced that everything Myrna recalled was true. He was incredibly intrigued by Myrna's reference to the underground alien base, which he thought could be located in a nearby cavern. After the first session's success, Paul, Myrna, and Dr. Sprinkle resolved to conduct another hypnotherapy session in a few weeks. Dr. Sprinkle returned to Albuquerque on June 3, 1980. He was excited to continue to help Myrna unlock her memories from the abduction. But when Paul opened his door,
about
Dr.
Gemini
Sprinkle
is this
could
is
say
a
that
served
something
product
had
where
drastically
Gemini, Google
changed
has their
with
internal
him.
model weights and have done all
His
these
eyes
processes that
were
we talked about.
wild.
And in
His
the served
clothes were
product,
a
what came out
rumpled
after
mess.
this was that they had
Even
a
more
prompt that they
concerning,
were rewriting user
Paul
queries
was
to
heavily
boost
armed
diversity
with a
or
pistol
something.
on his
And
hip
this just made it,
and a
the
rifle in
outputs
his
were just
hand.
blatantly wrong.
Dr.
It was
Sprinkle
some sort of
reflexively took a step
organizational
back,
failure that
but
had this
Paul
prompt in
grabbed
that
him.
position.
He
And I
whispered
think
into Sprinkle's
Google
ear,
executives
"It's
probably
not
have all this.
safe.
I didn't say
They're
that
watching
in that
us."
detail, but it was
With
just a
that,
mess up in
Paul pulled the
execution
terrified doctor
that led
into
to
the
this
house.
ridiculous thing.
His
But at the
eyes
system
darted
the
around
model
the
weights
property,
might have been wrong.
making sure
So at
no
the
one was
very end
watching
of the
him.
pipeline, there was
Then
a rewriting.
he
To
slammed
something like a
the
system
door.
prompt. It was like the system prompt, or what is
Coming
called
up,
in industry like
Paul
rewrite
goes down
prompts.
the
So
rabbit
especially for
hole.
image
And
models,
now back to
if
the story.
you're using Dolly or ChatGPT to generate
In
you
the
an
summer of
image, you'll
1980,
say,
New
draw me a
Mexico
beautiful
State
car.
Trooper Gabe
With
Valdez
these
came into
leading
contact
image
with a
models,
woman named Myrna
they benefit
Hanselman.
from highly
Myrna
descriptive
claimed to have been
prompts.
abducted
So
by
what
a
would happen
UFO.
is if you do that with
Valdez
ChatGPT,
enlisted the help
a
of
language model
ufologist
behind the
Paul
scenes will
Benowitz,
rewrite the prompt
who
and
in
say,
turn
make this
sought
more
the
descriptive,
hypnosis
and then
expertise of
that
Dr.
passes
Leo
through the
Sprinkle.
prompt. So prompt rewriting is something that is used at multiple levels of industry, and it's used effectively for image models, and the Gemini example is just a failed execution.
Big philosophical question here with the RLHF to generalize. Where is human input, human in the loop, human data most useful in the current stage?
For the past few years, the highest cost human data has been in these preferences, which is comparing, I would say, highest cost and highest total usage. So a lot of money has gone to these pairwise comparisons where you have two model outputs and a human is comparing between the two of them. In earlier years, there was a lot of this instruction tuning data, so creating highly specific examples for something like a Reddit question to a domain that you care about. Language models use this struggle on math and code, so you would pay experts in math and code to come up with questions and write detailed answers that were used to train the models. Now it is the case that there are many model options that are way better than humans at writing detailed and eloquent answers for things like model encodes. So they talked about this with the Llama 3 release, where they switched to using Llama 3, 4, or 5B to write their answers for math and code, but they, in their paper, talked about how they use extensive human preference tuning, which is something that they haven't gotten AIs to replace. There are other techniques in industry like constitutional AI, where it uses human data for preferences and AI for preferences, and I expect the AI part to scale faster than the human part. But among the research that we have access to is that humans are in this kind of preference loop.
So for as reasoning becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, as we said, where's the role of humans in that?
It's even less prevalent. So it's the remarkable thing about these reasoning results, and especially the DeepSeek R1 paper, is this result that they call DeepSeek R10, which is they took one of these pre-trained models, they put DeepSeek v3 base, and then they do this reinforcement learning optimization on verifiable questions or verifiable rewards for a lot of questions and a lot of training, and these reasoning behaviors emerge naturally. So these things like, wait, let me see, wait, let me check this, oh, that might be a mistake, and they emerge from only having questions and answers. And when you're using the model, the part that you look at is the completion. So in this case, all of that just emerges from this large-scale RL training, and that model, which the weights are available, has no human preferences added into the post-training.
The solving strategies you see this model use as chain of thought. It's how it goes back and forth thinking to itself. These thoughts are emergent. And this is actually seriously incredible, impressive, and new, and is publicly available and documented. The model could never learn this with imitation, because the cognition of the model and the cognition of the human labeler is different. The human would never know to correctly annotate these kinds of solving strategies and what they should even look like. They have to be discovered during reinforcement learning as empirical and statistically useful towards the final outcome. Anyway, the alpha zero sort of metaphor analogy here. Can you speak to that, the magic of the chain of thought that he's referring to?
I think it's good to recap AlphaGo and AlphaZero because it plays nicely with these analogies between imitation learning and learning from scratch. So AlphaGo, the beginning of the process was learning from humans, but they started this is the first expert level Go player or chess player in DeepMind series models where they had some human data. And then why it is called AlphaZero is that there was zero human that change to Alpha Zero made a model that was dramatically more powerful than this design. So this remove of the human prior, the human inductive bias, makes the final system far more powerful. That we mentioned later less than hours ago, and this is all aligned with this. And then there's been a lot of discussions in language models. This is not new. This goes back to the whole Q star rumors, which, if you piece together the pieces, is probably the start of OpenAI figuring out its O1 stuff when last year in November the Q star rumors came out. There's a lot of intellectual drive to know when is something like this going to happen in language models. We know these models are so powerful. We know it has been so successful in the past. And it is a reasonable analogy that this new type of reinforcement learning training for reasoning models is when the door is open for this. We don't yet have the equivalent of turn 37, which was the famous turn where the DeepMind AI plane Go stumped Lee Sedol completely. We don't have something that's that level of focal point, but that doesn't mean that the approach to technology is different and the impact of the general training is still incredibly good.
What do you think that point would be? What would be move 37 for chain of thought for reasoning?
Scientific discovery. Like when you use this sort of reasoning problem and it's just something we fully don't expect.
I think it's actually probably simpler than that. It's probably something related to computers or robotics rather than science discovery. Because the important aspect here is models take so much data to learn, there's not sample efficient, right? Trillions, they take the entire web, right? Over 10 trillion tokens to train on, right? This would take a human thousands of years to read, right? A human does not, and humans know most of the stuff, a lot of stuff models know better than us, right? Humans are way, way, way more sample efficient. That is because of this self-play, right? How does a baby learn what its body is? Is it sticks its foot in its mouth and it says, oh, this is my body, right? It sticks its hand in its mouth and it calibrates its touch on its fingers with the most sensitive touch thing on its tongue, right? Like that's how babies learn. And it's just self-play over and over and over and over again. And now we have something that is similar to that, right? With these verifiable proofs, right? Whether it's a unit tested code or mathematical verifiable tasks, generate many traces of reasoning, right? Then keep branching them out, and then check at the end, hey, which one actually has the right answer? Most of them are wrong, great. These are the few that are right. Maybe we use some sort of reward model outside of this to select even the best ones of preference as well. But now you've started to get better and better at these benchmarks. And so you've seen over the last 6 months a skyrocketing in a lot of different benchmarks, all mapping to benchmarks are pretty much solved, except for frontier math, which is designed to be almost questions that aren't practical to most people because they're exam level open math problem type things. So it's like on the math problems that are somewhat reasonable, which is like somewhat complicated word problems or coding problems, just what Dylan was saying. So the thing here is that these are only with verifiable tests. We earlier showed an example of the really interesting, like what happens with chain of thought is to a non-verifiable thing. There's like a human, chatting, right, with a, thinking about what's novel for humans or a unique thought. But this task and form of training only works when it's verifiable. And from here, the thought is, okay, we can continue to scale. I can see, I can read, I can write, blah, 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 whatever, vision, audio, etc. But then you'll have it play in a sandbox infinitely and figure out math, figure out code, figure out navigating the web, figure out operating a robot arm, right? And then it'll learn so much. And the aha moment, I think, will be when this is available to then create something that's not good, right? Like, oh, cool, part of it was like figuring out how to use the web. Now all of a sudden, it's figured out really well how to get hundreds of thousands of followers that are real and real engagement on Twitter because all of a sudden this is one of the things that are verifiable.
And maybe not just engagement, but make money.
Yes,
becoming it. I mean, that could be the thing where almost fully automated, it makes $10 million by being an influencer, selling a product, creating a product, like. And I'm not referring to like a hype product, but an actual product. Like, holy shit, this thing created a business. It's running it. It's the face of the business. That kind of thing. Maybe number one song, but it creates the whole infrastructure required to create the song, to be the influencer that represents that song, that kind of thing. It makes a lot of
That could be the move. I mean, our culture like money moves, right?
And it's verifiable, right?
Verifiable, right?
The bank account can't lie.
Exactly.
There's surprising evidence that once you set up the ways of collecting the verifiable domain, that this can work. There's been a lot of research before this R1 on math problems, and they approach math with language models just by increasing the number of samples. So you can just try again and again and again, and you look at the amount of times that the language models get it right. And what we see is that even very bad models get it right sometimes. And the whole idea behind reinforcement learning is that you can learn from very sparse rewards. So it does it. The space of language and the space of tokens, whether you're generating language or tasks or a robot, is so big that you might say that it's like, I mean, each the tokenizer for a language model can be like 200,000 things. So at each step, it can sample from that big of a space. So if it can generate a bit of a signal that it can climb onto, that's what the whole field of RL is around, is learning from sparse rewards. And the same thing has played out in math, where it's like very weak models that sometimes generate answers. You see research already that you can boost their math scores. You can do this sort of RL training for math. It might not be as effective, but if you take a 1 billion parameter model, so something 600 times smaller than DeepSeek, you can boost its grade school math scores very directly with a small amount of its training. So it's not to say that this is coming soon. Setting up the verification domain is extremely hard, and there's a lot of nuance in this, but we can make soft verifiers and things like this. But there is more training after reasoning, which makes it easier to use these reasoning models, and that's what we're using right now. So we're talking about Wizard Mini and O1. These have gone through these extra techniques that are designed for human preferences after being trained to elicit reasoning.
I think one of the things that people are ignoring is Google's Gemini flash thinking is both cheaper than R1 and better. And it's released in the beginning of December.
And nobody's talking about it.
No one. It has a different flavor to it. Its behavior is less expressive than something like O1, or it has fewer tracks than is on. Quen released a model last fall, QWQ, which was their preview reasoning model, and DeepSeek had R1 Lite last fall, where these models kind of felt like they're on rails, but they really, really only can do math and code. And O1 it can answer anything. It might not be perfect for some tasks, but it's flexible. It has some richness to it, and this is kind of the art of how cooked. Like, how, is a model a little bit undercooked? It's like, it's good to get a model out the door. Hard to gauge, and it takes a lot of taste to be like, is this a full-fledged model? Can I use this for everything? They're probably more similar for math and code. My quick read is that Gemini Flash is not trained in the same way as O1, but
I mean, in some sense, it's better structured. It makes more sense.
When it latched onto humans and then it went into organisms and oh wow.
Apex predator, focus on domestication, apply domestication to humans, explore idea of self-domestication.
not good. Not good.
Where is this going? Refined articulate insight, greater facial expressiveness and communication ability, yes. Plasticity and adaptability, yes. Dependence on social groups, yes. Alright. And self-critique and refine further. This is truly novel. This is more important. So on, so forth. And the insight I'm getting at is humans are not just social animals, but profoundly self-domesticated apes. And this self-domestication is the key to understanding our unique cognitive and social abilities. Self-domesticated apes.
I prefer the DeepSeek version.
I mean, it's novel. The insight is novel. I mean, that's like a good book title, Self-Domesticated Apes. We could do a case for that. I mean, yeah, it's cool. It's revealing the reasoning. It's magical. It's magical. Like, this is really powerful. Hello, everyone. This is Lex with a quick intermission, recorded after the podcast. Since we reviewed responses from DeepSeek R1 and Gemini Flash 2.0 thinking during this conversation, I thought at this moment it would be nice to insert myself quickly doing the same for OpenAI O1 Pro and O3 Mini with the same prompt. The prompt being, give one truly novel insight about humans. And I thought I would, in general, give my vibe check and vibe-based anecdotal report, my own experiences with the new
So I would probably categorize these questions as, let's say, open-ended philosophical questions, and in particular, the emphasis on novelty. I think is a nice way to test one of the capabilities of the model. Just come up with something that makes you pause and almost surprise you with its brilliance. That said, my general review after reading these kind of chain of thought raw tokens of R1, there's something genuinely beautiful about observing the path of deliberation in an intelligent system. I think we don't always have that explicitly laid out for us. We just see it in another intelligent system. The nonlinearity of this, akin to Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, it's just beautiful to watch. Anyway, as we discussed in the episode DeepSeek R1, we talked about humans being able to convert subject desires into cooperative systems by collectively pretending abstract reality, the external world, and their own private mental landscapes. Then merge these two rewritten layers into a continuous personal narrative that is objectively true, feels true. This is poetry. Okay, and then OC Mini High for me was smart, fast, actually, and kind of generic. Never quite got there for me. So here's the first one I got from OC Mini. Humans are not fixed beings, but rather ongoing narratives, dynamic stories of a continuously right editing and reinterpreting. This narrative plasticity is more than just memory or self-reflection. It's an intrinsic cognitive process that acts like an internal error correction system. It allows us to adapt our
And so chain of thought is one.
it allows us to adapt our
And so chain of thought is one thing where it's one chain, it backtracks, goes back and forth. But how they solved the ARC AGI challenge was not just the chain of thought. It was also sampling many times, i.e., running them in parallel and then selecting.
It's running in parallel, actually, search. I don't know if we have the full information on how the launch pro was. Oh, actually, search. I don't know if we have the full information on how the launch pro was. So, I don't have enough information to confidently say that it is search.
It is parallel sampling.
Yeah,
and it selects them.
And we don't know what the selection function is. The reason why we're debating is because since O1 was announced, there's been a lot of interest in techniques called Monte Carlo tree research, which is where you will break down the chain of thought into intermediate steps. We haven't defined chain of thought. Chain of thought is from a paper from years ago where you introduced the idea to ask a language model that at the time was much less easy to use, who would say, let's verify step by step, and it would induce the model to do this bulleted list of steps. Chain of thought is now almost a default in models where if you ask it a math question, you don't need to tell it to do step by step. And the idea with Monte Carlo tree search is that you would take an intermediate point in that train, do some sort of expansion, spend more compute, and then select the right one. That's like a very complex form of search that has been used in things like U0 and AlphaZero potentially. I know U0 does this. Another form of search is just asking 5 different people and then taking the majority answer. Yes. Right. There's a variety of it can be complicated, it can be simple. We don't know what it is, just that they are not just issuing one chain of thought individually. They're launching many in parallel. And in the ARC AGI, they launched 1,000 in parallel for their the one that really shocked everyone that beat the benchmark was they would launch 1,000 in parallel and then they would get the right answer 80% of the time or 70% of the time, 90 maybe. Whereas if they just launched one, it was 30%. So I would say the simplest one is that on it was $60-$70 per million tokens, right? Which is the cost per intelligence was ridiculous. Now, as we scale forward 2 years, we've had a 1,200x reduction in cost to achieve the same level of intelligence in GPT-3.
So here on the x-axis is time over just a couple of years, and on the y-axis is log scale dollars to run inference on a million tokens. So you have just a dollar, like a linear decline on the log scale from GPT-3 to 3.5 to wow.
It's 5 cents or something like that now, right? Which is versus $60, 1,200x. That's not the exact number, but 1,200x. I remember that number is the humongous cost per intelligence. Right now, the freak out over DeepSeek and oh my god, they made it so cheap. It's like, hey, actually, if you look at this trend line, they're not below the trend line, first of all, and at least for GPT-3, right? They are the first to hit it, right, which is a big deal. But they're not below the trend line as far as GPT-3. Now we have GPT-4. What's going to happen with these reasoning capabilities, right? It's a mix of architectural innovations, it's a mix of better data, and it's going to be better training techniques, and all of these different better inference systems, better hardware, right? Going from each generation of GPU to new generation ASIC, everything is going to take this cost curve down and down and down and down. And then can I just spawn 1,000 different LLMs to create a task, and then can I just spawn 1,000 different LLMs to create a task, and then pick from one of them, or whatever search technique I want, a tree, Monte Carlo tree search, video stock. Everyone is looking for a reason to sell or to be worried, right? It was Blackwell delays, right? Their GPU was, there's
large disk. Have they truly just encountered extraterrestrials? Beings not of this earth?
We're at 50 years of Moore's law. Every 2 years happens. Double the transistors. Just like clockwork. And it's slowed down, obviously, but like the semiconductor industry has gone up the whole time, right? It's been wavy, right? There's obviously cycles and stuff. And I don't expect AI to be any different, right? There's going to be ebbs and flows, but this is in AI. It's just playing out at an insane pace, right? It was 2x every 2 years. This is 1,200x in like 3 years, right? So it's like the scale of improvement that is like hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I was confused because to me, NVIDIA stock on that should have gone up. But maybe it went down because there's kind of suspicion of foul play on the side of China, something like this. But if you just look purely at the actual principles at play here, like it's obvious. Yeah, the Jerron's paradox.
Progress that AI makes, or the derivative of AI progress is especially because NVIDIA is in the best place. The higher the derivatives, the sooner the market's going to be bigger and expanding, and NVIDIA is the only one that does everything reliably right now.
Because it's not like an NVIDIA competitor arose. It's another company that's using NVIDIA.
Who historically has been a large NVIDIA customer.
Yeah.
And has press releases about them cheering about being China's biggest NVIDIA customer, right? Like,
yeah,
obviously they've quieted down, but like I think that's like another element of it. They don't want to say how many GPUs they have because yes they have H800s, yes they have H20s, they also have some H100s, right? Which are smuggled in.
Can you speak to that, to the smuggling? What's the scale of smuggling that's feasible for a nation state to do, for a company? Is it possible to...
I think there's a few angles of smuggling here, right? One is ByteDance arguably is the largest smuggler of GPUs for China, right? China's not supposed to have GPUs. ByteDance has like over 500,000 GPUs. Why? Because they're all rented from companies around the world. They rent from Oracle, they rent from Google, they rent from all these massive, and a bunch of smaller cloud companies too, right? All the neo clouds, right, of the world. They rent so many GPUs. They also buy a bunch, right? And they do this for mostly like what Meta does, right? Serving. Next same discussion. Right? To be clear, that's today the views, right? And it's in the US, 50,000. You sell it for 300,000 in China. Wait, you just got a free first class ticket and a lot more money. So it's like, and that's like small scale smuggling. Most of the large scale smuggling is like Singapore and Malaysia, like routing them around or renting GPUs.
I want to jump in. How much is the scale? I think there's been some number, like some people that are higher level economic understanding say that as you go from 1 billion to 10 billion, you're hiding certain levels of economic activity, and that's the most reasonable thing to me, is that there's going to be some level where it's so obvious that it's easier to find this economic activity. And
yeah, so my belief is that last year roughly so NVIDIA made 1 million H20s, which were legally allowed to be shipped to China, which we talked about is better for reasoning, right? Inference at least, not training, but reasoning inference, and inference generally. Then they also had a couple 100,000, we think like 200 to 300,000 GPUs were routed to China from Singapore, Malaysia, US, wherever. Companies spawn up, buy 60 GPUs, jumps, right? To billion-dollar models, $10 billion models. Then it becomes, hey, there is a compute disadvantage for China for training models and serving them. And the serving part is really critical, right? DeepSeek cannot serve their model today. It's completely out of inventory. It's already started falling in the App Store, actually, downloads, because you can't download it, try and sign up. They said we're not taking registrations because that's what happened, right? highest value per kilogram, probably by far. I have another question for you, though. Do you track model API access internationally? How easy is it for Chinese companies to use hosted model APIs from the US? Yeah, I mean, that's incredibly easy, right? Like OpenAI publicly stated DeepSeek uses their API, and as they say, they have evidence, right? And this is another element of the training regime is people at OpenAI have claimed that it's a distilled model, i.e., you're taking OpenAI's model, you're generating a lot of output, and then you're training on the output in their model. And even if that's the case, what they did is still amazing, by the way, what DeepSeek did efficiency-wise.
Distillation is standard practice in industry, whether or not, if you're at a closed lab where you care about terms of service and IP closely, you distill from your own models. If you are a researcher and you're not building any products, you distill from the AI model.
It's a good opportunity. Can you explain big picture distillation as a process? What is distillation? What's the process of distillation?
Talked a lot about training language models. They are trained on text. And post-training, you're trying to train on very high-quality text that you want the model to match the features of, or if you're using RL, you're letting the model find its own thing. But for supervised fine-tuning, for preference data, you need to have some completions what the model is trying to learn to imitate. The loophole, which is that I generate data from OpenAI, and then I upload it somewhere, and then somebody else trains on it, and the link has been broken. Like they're not under the same terms of service contract. This is why there's a lot of like to be discovered details that don't make a lot of sense. This is why a lot of models today, even if they train on zero OpenAI data, you ask the model who trained you, it'll say I'm ChatGPT trained by OpenAI, because there's so much copy paste of like OpenAI outputs from that on the internet that you just weren't able to filter it out. And there was nothing in the RL where they implemented like, hey, like, or post-training or SFT, whatever, that says, hey, I'm actually modeled by Allen Institute instead of
we have to do this as we serve a demo. We do research and we use OpenAI APIs and those useful, and we want to understand post-training, and like our research models, they will say they're written by OpenAI unless we put in the system prompt that we talked about that like, I am a language model trained by the Allen Institute for AI. And if you ask more people around industry, especially with post-training, it's a very doable task to make the model say who it is or to suppress the OpenAI thing. So, at some levels, it might be that DeepSeek didn't care that it was saying that it was by OpenAI. Like, if you're going to upload model weights, it doesn't really matter, because anyone that's serving it in an application and cares a lot about serving is going to, when serving it, if they're using it for a specific task, they're going to tailor it to that. It doesn't matter that it's saying it's ChatGPT.
Oh, I guess one of the ways to do that is like a system prompt or something like that. Like that if you're serving it, to say that you're.
That's what we do. We host the demo. You say you are Sulu 3, a language model trained by the Allen Institute for AI. We also are benefited from OpenAI data because it's a great research tool.
I mean, do you think there's any truth and value to the claim, OpenAI's claim, that there's evidence that Chinese DeepSeek uses model?
I think everyone has benefited regardless because the data's on the internet, and therefore it's in your training. Right? There are like subreddits where people share the best ChatGPT outputs, and those are in your.
I think that they're trying to shift them. They're trying to protect themselves, and we saw this years ago when ByteDance was actually banned from some OpenAI APIs for training on outputs. There's other AI startups that most people, if you're in the like AI culture, like they just told us they trained on OpenAI outputs and they never got banned. Like that's how they bootstrapped their early models. So it's much easier to get off the ground using this than to set up human pipelines and build a strong model. There's a long history here, and a lot of the communications seem like narrative.
Actually, like over the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of people distill DeepSeek's model into Llama models because the DeepSeek models are kind of complicated to run inference on because they're a mixture of experts, 600 plus billion parameters and all this. So people distill them into the Llama models, and then, because the Llama models are so easy to serve, if everyone built the pipeline, the tooling for inference with the Llama models, right? Because it's the open standard. So we've seen a sort of roundabout, right? Like, is it backward? That is illegal. Maybe it's illegal, whatever. I don't know about that, but like, it should break contracts. I don't think it's illegal. Like in any legal, like no one's going to jail for this.
I think like fundamentally, I think it's ethical, or I hope it's ethical, because like the moment it becomes, we ban that kind of thing, it's going to make everybody much worse off. And I also actually, this is difficult, but I think you should be allowed to train on the internet. I
I know a lot of authors and creators are pretty sensitive about it. That's a difficult question. So like the moment you're not allowed to train on the internet,
I agree. I have a schizo take on how you control it.
all right,
But already, I have a reasonable take on it.
all right.
So Japan has a law which you're allowed to train on any training data and cognitive behavioral if you want to train a model. A. B. Japan has 9 gigawatts of curtailed nuclear power. C. Japan is allowed under the AI diffusion rules to import as many GPUs as they'd like. So all we have to do, we have a market here to make. We build massive data centers, we rent them to the labs, and then we train models in a legally permissible way, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And now the models have no like potential copyright lawsuit from New York Times or anything like that. No, it's just like completely legal. No, so
Genius.
the early copyright lawsuits have fallen in favor of AI training. I would say that the long tail of use is going to go in the side of AI, which is if you scrape trillions of data, you're not looking at trillions of tokens of data. You're not looking and saying this. Even the meta team is going to have 1 million contact points, and that's kind of how the world works. As far as like industrial espionage and things, that has been greatly successful in the past, right? The Americans did it to the Brits, the Chinese have done it to the Americans, right? And so on and so forth. It is a fact of life. And so, like, to argue industrial espionage can be stopped is probably unlikely. It can make it difficult, but even then, like, there's all these stories about like, hey, F-35 and F-22 have already been like sort of like given to China in terms of design plans and stuff. Code and stuff like between, I say companies, not nation states, is probably very difficult. But ideas are discussed a lot, right? Whether it be a house party in San Francisco, or a company changing employees, or or the always the like mythical honeypot that always gets talked about, right? Like someone gets honeypotted, right? Because everyone working on AI is a single dude who's in their 20s and 30s. Not everyone, but like an insane amount of insane percentages. So there's always like all these like and obviously
No, honey fire is like a spy, a female spy for New Zealand, like
yeah, or male, right? It could be in San Francisco, right? But as a single dude, I will say in his late 20s, right? It's like we are very easily corrupted, right? Like like not corrupted myself, but like we are, right?
everybody else, not me.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm too oblivious that I am not single, so I would say from one espionage axis.
Yeah, you have to make sure to filter all the security vulnerabilities. So you did collect a lot of information about each of the mega clusters for each of the major AI companies. Can you talk about the build outs for each one that stand out?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's like really important about these mega cluster buildouts is they're completely unprecedented in scale, right? U.S. Sort of like data center power consumption has been slowly on the rise, and it's gone up to 2-3% even through the cloud computing revolution, right? Data center consumption as a percentage of total U.S. And that's been over decades, right, of data centers, et cetera. It's been climbing slowly. But now, 2 to 3%. Now, by the end of this decade, it's like even under like when I say like 10%, a lot of people that are traditionally by like 2028, 2030, people traditionally traditional data center people like that nuts. But then like people who are in like AI who have like really looked at this at like the Anthropics and OpenAI's are like that's not enough. But like this is both through globally distributed or distributed throughout the U.S. as well as like centralized clusters, right? The distributed throughout the U.S. is exciting and it's the bulk of it, right? Like hey, OpenAI or say Meta's adding a gigawatt, right? But most of it is distributed through the U.S. for inference and all these other things, right?
So maybe we should lay out what a cluster is. So does this include AWS? Maybe it's good to talk about the different kinds of clusters and what you mean by mega clusters and what's a GPU and what's a computer and what.
Yeah.
Not that far back, but yeah. So like, what do we mean by the clusters?
Oh man, I thought I was about to do the Apple ad, right? What's a computer? So traditionally, data centers and data center tasks have been a distributed systems problem that is capable of being spread very far and widely, right? I.e., compute, unprecedented run, right, in terms of the size and the cost, right? A couple $100 million on a YOLO, right? A YOLO run for GPT-4, and it yielded this magical improvement that was like perfectly in line with what was experimented and just like a log scale right now.
Oh yeah, they have that plot. The technical remarks.
The scaling laws are perfect, right? But that's not a crazy number, right? 20,000 A100s, roughly each GPU is consuming 400 watts. And then when you add in the whole server, right, everything, it's like 15 to 20 megawatts of power, right? You know, maybe you could look up what the power of consumption of a person is because the numbers are going to get silly. But like 15 to 20 megawatts was standard data center size. It was just unprecedented. That was all GPUs running 1,000 watts of this toaster. A toaster is like
That's a good example.
similar power consumption to an A100, right? H100 comes around, they increase the power from like 400 to 700 watts, and that's just per GPU, and then there's all the associated stuff around it. So once you count all that, it's roughly like 1,200 to 1,400 watts for everything, networking, CPUs, memory, blah, blah, blah.
So we should also say what's required. So power, a lot of power is required, a lot of heat is generated, cooling is required, and because there's a lot of GPUs that have to be, or CPUs or whatever.
Say I was started later, right? But then he spent heaven and hell to get his data center. Say I was started later, right? But then he spent heaven and hell to get his data center up and get the largest cluster in the world, right? Which is 200,000 GPUs. And he did that. He bought a factory in Memphis. He's upgrading the substation, but at the same time he's upgrading the substation, but at the same time he's got a bunch of mobile power generation, a bunch of single cycle combines. He tapped the natural gas line that's right next to the factory. He's pulling a ton of gas, burning gas. He's generating all this power. He's in a factory in an old appliance factory that shut down and moved to China long ago, right? Like, and he's got 200,000 GPUs in it. And now what's the next scale, right? Like all the hyperscalers have done this. Now the next scale is something that's even bigger, right? And so Elon, just to stick on the topic, he's building his own natural gas plant, like a proper one, right next door. He's deploying tons of Tesla Megapack batteries to make the power more smooth, and all sorts of other things. He's got like industrial chillers to cool the water down because he's water cooling the chips. So all these crazy things to get the water cooling the chips. All these crazy things to get the clusters bigger and bigger. But when you look at, like, say, what OpenAI did with Stargate, that in Arizona, in Abilene, Texas, right? What they've announced, at least, right? It's not built, right? Elon says they don't have the money. There's debates about this. But at full scale, at least the first section is like definitely money's accounted for, but there's multiple sections. But full scale, that data center is going to be 2.2 gigawatts, right? 2,200 megawatts of power in, and roughly like 1.8 gigawatts or 1,800. Big thing is like certain regions of the U.S. transmitting power costs more than actually generating it, right? Because the grid is so slow to build, and the demand for power and the ability to build power and like re-ramping on a natural gas plant or even coal plant is like easy enough to do, but like transmitting the power is really hard. So in some parts of the U.S., like in Virginia, it costs more to transmit power than it costs to generate it. Which is like, there's all sorts of like second order effects that are insane.
And the power grid work kind of broke.
Trump's executive orders. There was a Biden executive order before the end of the year, but then Trump had some more executive orders, which hopefully reduce the regulations to where yes, things can be built. But yeah, this is a big challenge, right? It's building enough power fast.
Are you going to basically have a nuclear power plant next to a data center for each one of these?
So the fun thing here is this is too slow to build the power plant. To build a power plant or to reconfigure an existing power plant is too slow. And so therefore you must use data center power consumption is slow, right? Like it's spikes, right?
Why nuclear is also good for it. Like long term, nuclear is a very natural fit. But yeah, you can't do solar or anything in the short term.
Use gas, right? Because the race is that important, and if we lose, that's way worse, right?
I should say that I got a chance to visit the Memphis data center, and it's kind of incredible. I mean, I visited with Elon. Just the teams and the rate of innovation there is insane. Because my sense is that nobody's ever done anything of this scale, and nobody has certainly ever done anything of this scale at the rate that XAI is doing. So they're like figuring out. I mean, so I'm sitting in all these meetings where they brainstorm. It's like it's insane. It's exciting because they're trying to figure out what the bottlenecks are, how to remove the bottlenecks, how to make sure that there's just so many really
cool things about putting together a data center because everything has to work. It's the people that do like the sysadmin, the machine learning, all that is the exciting thing and so on. But really, the people that run everything are the folks that know like the low level software and hardware that runs everything, the networking, all of that. And so you have to like make sure you have procedures that test everything. I think they're using Ethernet. I don't know how they're doing the networking, but
they're using NVIDIA Spectrum Ethernet. There's actually like, I think the unsung heroes are the cooling and electrical systems, which are just like glossed over.
Yeah.
But I think like one story that maybe is like exemplifies how insane this stuff is when you're training, right? You're always doing you're running through the model a bunch. Everyone has different solutions, but like Meta's at least was public and openly known, which is just like set this operator, and what this operator does is it just makes the GPUs compute nothing, so that the power doesn't spike.
But that just tells you how much power you're working with. I mean, it's insane. It's insane.
People should just go Google like scale, like what does X watts do, and go through all the scales from 1 watt to a kilowatt to a megawatt. And you stare at that, and you're how high on the list the gigawatt is. It's
Can you say something about the cooling? So I know Elon's using liquid cooling, I believe, in all cases. That's a new thing, right? Most of them don't use liquid cooling. Is there something interesting to say about the cooling?
Yeah. So air cooling has been the de facto standard. Throw a bunch of metal, heat pipes, etc., and fans, right? And like that's cool. That's been enough to cool it. People have been dabbling in water cooling. Google's TPUs are water cooled, right? So they've been doing that for a few years. But with GPUs, no one's ever done, and no one's ever done the scale of water cooling that Elon just did, right? Now, next generation NVIDIA, it's for the like highest end GPU, it is mandatory water cooling. You have to water cool it. But Elon did it on this current generation, and that required a lot of stuff, right? If you look at like some of the satellite photos and stuff of the Memphis facility, there's all these external water chillers that are sitting basically. It looks like a semi-truck pod thing, what they call the container. But really, those are water chillers, and he has like 90 of those water chillers just sitting outside. 90 different containers, right? With water, that chill the water, bring it back to the data center, and then you distribute it to all the chips, pull all the heat out, and then send it back, right? And this is both a way to cool the chips, but also an efficiency thing. All right, and going back to that like sort of three vector thing, right? There is memory bandwidth, flops, and interconnect. The closer the chips are together, the easier it is to do high speed interconnects, right? And so this is also like a reason why you want to go water cooling is because you can just put the chips right next to each other and therefore get higher speed connectivity.
I gotta ask you. So in one of your recent posts, there's a section called cluster measuring contest. So
there's another word there, but I won't say.
Who's got the biggest now, and who's the not?
Today, individual largest is Elon, right?
Elon's cluster.
Elon's cluster in Memphis, 200,000 GPUs, right? Meta has like 128,000. OpenAI has 100,000 now. Now, to be clear, other companies have more GPUs than Elon. They just don't have them in one place, right? And for training, you want them tightly connected. There's some techniques that people are researching and working on that let you train across multiple regions, but for the most part, you want them all in like one area, right? So you can connect them highly with high-speed networking. And so, Elon today has 200,000 H100s, and 100,000 H100s, 100,000 H200s, right? Meta, OpenAI, and Amazon all have on the 100,000, a little bit less. But this year, right? This year, people are building much more, right? Anthropic and Amazon are building a cluster of 400,000 Trainium 2, which is an Amazon-specific chip, trying to get away from NVIDIA, right? Meta and OpenAI have scales for hundreds of thousands, but by next year, you'll have like 500,000 to 700,000 GPU clusters. And note those GPUs. That doesn't apply anymore because there's not much more data in the pre-training stuff, right? Yes, there's video and audio and image that has not been fully taken advantage of, so there's a lot more scaling. But a lot of people have taken transcripts of YouTube videos, and that gets you a lot of the data. It doesn't get you all of the learning value out of the video and image data, but there's still scaling to be done on pre-training. But this post-training world is where all the flops are going to be small, right? The model's going to play with itself. It's going to self-play. It's going to do verifiable tasks. computer use in sandboxes. It might even do like simulated robotics things, right? Like all of these things are going to be environments where compute is spent in quote unquote post training. But I think it's going to be good. We're going to drop the post in post training. Yeah. It's going to be pre-training and it's going to be training. I think at some point, because for like bulk of like the last few years, pre-training has dwarfed post training. But with these verifiable methods, especially ones that scale really, potentially infinitely, like computer use and robotics, not just math and coding, right, where you can verify what's happening, those infinitely verifiable tasks, it seems you can spend as much compute as you want to, especially if the context length increases.
Because at the end of pre-training is when you increase the context length for these models, and we've talked earlier in the conversation about how the context length, when you have a long input, is much easier to manage than output. And a lot of these post-training and reasoning techniques rely on a ton of sampling, and it's becoming increasingly long context. So there's like effectively your compute efficiency goes down. Flops is the standard for how you measure it, but with RL, and you have to do all these things where you move your weights around in a different way than in pre-training and each generation, it's going to become less efficient, and flops is going to be less of a useful term. And then as the infrastructure gets better, it's probably going to go back to flops.
So all of the things we've been talking about is most likely going to be NVIDIA, right? Is there any competitors?
Google, I kind of ignored them.
What's the story with TPU? Like, what's the
TPU is awesome, right? It's great. Google is they're a bit more tepid on building data centers for some reason. They're building big data centers. Don't get me wrong, and they actually have the biggest cluster. I was talking about NVIDIA clusters. They actually have the biggest cluster. Period. But the way they do it is like very interesting, right? They have two sort of like data center super regions, right? In that the data center isn't physically like all the GPUs aren't physically on one site, but they're like 30 miles from each other. They're not GPUs, TPUs, right? They have like in Iowa and Nebraska, they have 4 data centers that are just like right next to each other.
Why doesn't Google flex its cluster size?
Go to multi-data center training. There's some good images in there, so I'll show you what I mean. It's just semi-analysis multi-data center. So this is like, so this is an image of like what a standard Google data center looks like. By the way, their data centers look very different than anyone else's data center.
What are we looking at here?
So these are, so if you see this image, right, in the center there are these big rectangular boxes, right? Those are where the actual chips are kept. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, you can see there's like these water pipes, there's these chiller cooling towers in the top, and a bunch of like diesel generators. The diesel generators are backup power. The data center itself is like look physically smaller than the water chillers, right? So the chips are actually easier to like keep together, but then like cooling all the water for the water cooling is very difficult, right? So Google has like a very advanced infrastructure that no one else has for the TPU. And what they do is they've like they go a little bit further, and so there's certain like aspects of the architecture that are optimized for their use case that are not optimized elsewhere, right? One simple one is like they've open sourced the Gemma model, and they called it Gemma 70, right? But then it's actually 8 billion parameters because the vocabulary is so large. And the reason they made the vocabulary so large is because TPU's like matrix multiply unit is massive. Because that's what they've like sort of optimized for. And so they decided, oh well, I'll just make the vocabulary large too, even though it makes no sense to do so in such a small model, because that fits on their hardware. So Gemma doesn't run as efficiently on the GPU as a Llama does, right? But vice versa, Llama doesn't run as efficiently on a GPU as a Gemma does, right? And so like there's like certain like aspects of like hardware software co-design. So all their search models are their ranking and recommendation models, all these different models that are AI but not like Gen AI, right? Have been hyper optimized with GPUs forever. The software stack is super optimized, but all of this software stack has not been released publicly at all, right? Very small portions of it. Jackson XLA has been, but like the experience when you're inside of Google and you're training on TPUs as a researcher, you don't need to know anything about the hardware in many cases, right? Like it's like pretty beautiful. But as soon as you step outside,
they'll go. A lot of them go back. They leave Google and then they go
nickel serve external customers, right? Internal teams like Jackson XLA and stuff, they more so serve DeepMind and search, right? And so their customer is different. They're not building a product for them.
Do you understand why AWS is winning versus Azure for cloud versus Google Cloud?
Yeah,
Google Cloud is tiny.
Google Cloud is third. Yeah. Microsoft is the second biggest, but Amazon is the biggest, right? And Microsoft deceptively sort of includes like Microsoft Office 365 and things like that, like some of these enterprise-wide licenses. So in reality, the gulf is even larger. Microsoft is still second there, right? Amazon is right, like I think like four of Amazon's top five revenue products, margin products, sorry, like gross profit products, are all database-related products, like Redshift and like all these things, right? Like, so Amazon has a very like good silicon to a user experience, like entire pipeline laid into it. I think Google, their silicon teams, yeah, they have awesome silicon internally, TPU, the YouTube chip, some of these other chips that they've made, and the problem is they're not serving external customers; they're serving internal customers, right?
I mean, NVIDIA's entire culture is designed from the bottom up to do this. There's this recent book, The NVIDIA Way by Jake Kim, that details this and how they look for future opportunities and ready their CUDA software libraries to make it so that new applications of high-performance computing can very rapidly be evolved on CUDA and NVIDIA chips. And that is an entirely different than Google as a services business.
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA, it should be said, is a truly special company. They, as a whole, the culture and everything, they're really up front with. Speaking of which, is there somebody that maybe would challenge NVIDIA hardware-wise? Intel, AMD?
I really don't think so. We went through a very long process of working with AMD on training on their GPUs and improving stuff, and they're decent. Their hardware is better in many ways than NVIDIA's. The problem is their software is really bad, and I think they're getting better, right? They're getting better faster, but the gulf is so large, and like they don't spend enough resources on it, or haven't historically, right? Maybe they're changing their tune now, but for multiple months we were submitting those bugs, right? Like submitting out, right? Like what the fuck? Like why are we submitting those bugs, right? Because they only cared about their like big customers, and so they shipped them to private edge, blah blah blah. PCs and data center CPUs, well, but data center CPUs are all going cloud, and Amazon, Microsoft, Google are making ARM-based CPUs, and then PC side, AMD's gained market share. NVIDIA's launching a chip. That's not going to be a success. Right? MediaTek, Qualcomm have launched chips. Apple's doing well, right? Like they could get squeezed a little bit in PC. Although PC generally, I imagine, will just stick Intel with those guys.
Let's talk about the broad AI race. Who do you think wins? We talked about Google.
The default leader has been Google because of their infrastructure advantage.
Well, like in the news, OpenAI is the leader.
They're the leading in the
narrative. They have the best model.
They have the best model that people can use, and
they have the most AI revenue.
Yeah, OpenAI is winning.
So who's making money on AI right now? Is anyone making money?
So accounting profit-wise, Microsoft is making money, but they're spending a lot of capex, right? And that gets depreciated over years. Meta's making a recommendation system, which is AI. The returns from it are going to be eventually huge once we have AGI.
So do you think multiple companies will get?
I don't think it's winner take all.
Okay. So it's not called AGI, whatever. Like a single day. It's a gradual
AI, super powerful AI.
But it's a gradually increasing set of features that are usable.
Rapidly increasing.
Rapidly increasing set of features. So you're saying a lot of companies will be. It just seems absurd that all of these companies are building gigantic data centers.
There'll be companies that will benefit from AI, but not because they train the best model. Like Meta has so many avenues to benefit from AI in all of their services. People are there. People spend time on Meta's platforms, and it's a way to make more money per user per hour.
Yeah, it seems like Google X/XAI/Tesla, important to say, and then Meta will benefit not directly from the AI like the LLMs, but from the intelligence, like the additional boost of intelligence to the products they already sell. That's right.
But it's going to get supported by ads, right? Like, while Meta already serves 405B, probably lose a bit of money, but at some point, they're going to get the models are going to get so cheap that they can just serve them for free with ads supported, right? And that's what Google's going to be able to do, and that's obviously they've got a bigger reach. But that is not going to be the only use case. It's like these reasoning, code, agents, computer use, all this stuff is where OpenAI has to actually go to make money in the future. Otherwise, it's cliff.
But X, Google, and Meta have these other products, so isn't it likely that OpenAI and Anthropic disappear eventually?
unless they're so good at models, which they are.
But it's such a cutting edge. I mean,
it depends on where you think AI capabilities are going.
You have to, even if the AI capabilities are going super rapidly, awesome into the direction of AGI, like there's still a boost for access in terms of data. Google in terms of data, Meta in terms of data, in terms of other products and money, and like there's huge amounts of money.
The whole idea is human data is kind of tapped out. We don't care. We all care about self-play, verifiable.
Yes, so
self-play.
AWS is an R&D model.
AWS does not make a lot of money on each individual machine, and the same can be said for the most powerful AI platform, which is even those that call the API are so cheap, there's still a lot of money to be made by owning that platform. And there's a lot of discussions that it's the next compute layer. You have to believe that, and yeah, there's a lot of discussions that tokens and tokenomics and LLM APIs are the next compute layer, or the next paradigm for the economy, kind of like energy and oil was. But there's also, like, you have to sort of believe that APIs and chat are not where AI is stuck, right? It is actually just tasks and agents and robotics and computer use. And those are the areas where all the value will be delivered, not API, not chat applications. Right?
Is it possible you have, it all just becomes a commodity and you have the very thin wrapper, like Perplexity? Just joking.
There are a lot of rappers making a lot of money.
Yeah, so, but do you think it's possible that people just get what OpenAI and Anthropic is and just, because there'll be wrappers around the API and it's just dynamic?
If model progress is not rapid, yes, it's becoming a commodity, right? GPT-3 shows this, but also the GPT-3 chart earlier, chart showed this, right? Llama 3B is 1200x cheaper than GPT-3. Any GPT-3, like anyone whose business model was GPT-3 level capabilities is dead. Anyone whose business model is GPT-4 level capabilities is dead.
It is a common saying that the best businesses being made now are ones that are predicated on models getting better,
right? Which would be like wrappers, thing that is riding the wave of the models.
The short term, the company that can make the most money is the one that figures out what advertising targeting method works for language model generation. So we have the meta ads, which are hyper targeted in feed, not within specific pieces of content, and we have search ads that are used by Google and Amazon has been rising a lot in search. But within a piece, within a return from ChatGPT, it is not clear how you get a high quality placed ad within the output. And if you can do that with model costs coming down, you can get super high revenue. Or like that revenue is totally untapped and it's not clear technically how it's done.
Yeah, that is. I mean, the sort of the ad science innovation they concluded. In one day, you'll have in GPT output an ad, and that's gonna make like billions.
And it could be very subtle. It could be in conversation. We have voice mode now. It could be some way of making it so the voice introduces certain things. It's much harder to measure, and it takes imagination to do that.
And it wouldn't be so shady. It wouldn't come off shady, so you would receive public blowback, that kind of thing. So you have to do it loud enough to where it's clear it's an ad. That's what comes balance on that. So that's the open question they're trying to solve. Anthropic and OpenAI.
They might not say.
I don't think they care about that.
They don't care about it right now. I think
they're
Perplexity are experimenting with that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, for sure.
Like Perplexity, Google, Meta care about this. I think OpenAI and Anthropic are purely laser focused on
AGI.
Yeah, the agents and AGI. And if I build AGI, I can make tons of money, right? Or I can pay for everything, right? And this is it's just predicated like back on the like export control thing, right? If you think AGI is 5-10 years away or less, right? These labs think it's 2-3 years away. Obviously, your actions are, you know, if you assume they're rational actors, which they are mostly, what you do in a 2-year AGI versus 5-year versus 10 years, very, very, very different, right?
Do you think agents are promising? We'll have to talk about this. This is like the excitement of the year. The agents are going to revolutionize. This is a generic hype term that a lot of business folks are using. AI agents are going to revolutionize everything.
Okay, so mostly the term agent is obviously overblown. We've talked a lot about reinforcement learning as a way to train for verifiable outcomes. Agents should mean something that is open-ended.
Is doing things for tens of seconds at a time, right? And then coming back with an output that I still need to verify and try to check out, right? And the biggest problem is, of course, like it's the same thing with manufacturing, right? Like there's the whole Six Sigma thing, right? Like, how many nines can you get, and then you compound the nines onto each other, and it's like if you multiply, by the number of steps that are Six Sigma, you get to a yield or something, right? So like in semiconductor manufacturing, tens of thousands of steps, 9999999 is not enough, right? Because you multiply that many times, you actually end up with like 0% yield, right?
Or zero.
Really low yield, yeah, or zero. And it's the same thing with agents, right? Like chaining tasks together each time. LLMs, even the best LLMs in particularly pretty good benchmarks, don't get 100%, right? They get a little bit below that because there's a lot of noise. And so, how do you get to enough nines, right? It's the same thing with self-driving. We can't have self-driving because without it being like super geofenced like Google's, right? And even then they have a bunch of teleoperators to make sure it doesn't stop, right? But you can't do that because it doesn't have enough nines.
And self-driving has quite a lot of structure because roads have rules. It's well defined. There's regulations. When you're talking about computer use for the open web, for example, or the open operating system, like there's no, it's a mess. So like the possibility, I'm always skeptical of any system that is tasked with interacting with the human world.
That's
It's messy.
the thing. If we can't get intelligence that's enough to solve the human world on its own, we can create infrastructure like the human operators for Waymo over many years. There's a company, I don't remember what it is, but that's
be able to deal with that website. When I, as a human, struggle, like I have an existential crisis every time I try to book an airplane ticket, struggle, like I have an existential crisis every time I try to book an airplane ticket that I think it's going to be extremely difficult to build an AI agent that's robust.
But think about it, like United has accepted the Starlink terms. They have to provide Starlink for free, and the users are going to love it. What if one airline is saying, we're going to take a year, we're going to make our website have white text that works perfectly for the AI. Every time anyone asks about an AI flight, they buy whatever airline it is. Or like they just like, here's an API, and it's only exposed to AI agents, and if anyone queries it, the price is 10% higher, and for any flight, we'll let you see any of our flights, and you can just book any of them. Here you go, agent. And then it's like, oh, and I made 10% higher price. Awesome. And like, am I willing to say that for like, hey, book me a flight to Sea Legs, right? It's like, yeah, whatever. I think computers and real world and the open world are really, really messy. But if you start defining the problem in narrow regions, people are going to be able to create very, very productive things. And ratchet down costs massively, right? Like now, crazy things like robotics in the home, those are going to be a lot harder to do, just like self-driving, right? Because it's just a billion different failure modes, right? But like agents that can like navigate a certain set of websites and do certain sets of tasks, or like look at your take a photo of your grocery your fridge, or like upload your recipes, and then like it figures out what to order from Amazon/Whole Foods food delivery, like that's going to be like pretty quick and easy to do, I think. So it's going to be a whole range of like business outcomes, and it's going to be tons of sort of optimism around people can just figure out ways to do it. To be clear, these sandboxes already exist. There are people who have built clones of all of the most popular websites of Google, Amazon, blah blah blah, to make it so that they're OpenAI probably has them internally to train these things. It's the same as DeepMind's robotics team for years has had clusters for robotics where you interact with robots fully remotely. They just have a lab in London, and you send tasks to it, and it arranges the blocks, and you do the research. Obviously, there's text there that currently is cranks of automation before you go from I wouldn't say easy either. I think like it takes someone who's been through at least a few years of CS or a couple of years of programming to do that well. And the models went from 4% to 60% in like years, right? And where are they going to go to next year? It's going to be higher. It probably won't be 100% because again, that nines is like really hard to do. But we're going to get to some point where and then we're going to need harder software engineering, and so on and so forth. But the way that like people think of it now is that you can do code completion easy. You can do some function generation after review it, great. But really, the like software engineering agents I think can be done faster, sooner than any other agent because it is a verifiable domain. You can always like unit test or compile, and there's many different regions of like they can inspect the whole code base at once, which no engineer really can. Only the architects can really think about this stuff, the really senior guys, and they can define stuff. And then the agent can execute on it. So I think software engineering costs are going to plummet like crazy. And one interesting aspect of that is when software engineering costs are really low, you get very different markets, right? So in the U.S., you have all these platform SaaS companies, right? Salesforce, so on and so forth, right? In China, no one uses platform SaaS. Everyone just builds their own stack because software engineering is much cheaper in China. Partially because like people, STEM graduates, etc. So it's generally just cheaper to do. And so at the same time, code LLMs have been adopted much less in China because the cost of an engineer there is much lower. But like, what happens when every company can just invent their own business logic like really cheaply and quickly? You stop using platform SaaS, you start building custom tailored solutions, you change them really quickly. Now all of a sudden your business is a little bit more efficient too potentially because you're not dealing with the hell that is like some random platform SaaS company stuff not working perfectly and having to adjust workflows or random business automation cases that aren't necessarily AI required. It's just logic that needs to be built that no one has done. Right? All of these things can go happen faster. So I think software, and then the other domain is like industrial, chemical, mechanical engineers suck at coding, right? Just generally, and like their tools, like semiconductor engineers, their tools are 20 years old. All the tools run on XP, including ASML lithography tools, run on Windows XP, right? It's like, and like a lot of the analysis happens in Excel, right? Like it's just like, guys, like you guys can move 20 years forward with all the data you have just gathered and like do a lot better. It's just you need the engineering skills for software engineering to be delivered to the actual domain expert engineers. So I think that's the area where I'm like super duper bullish of generally AI creating value.
The big picture is I don't think it's going to be quick. We talked. I think that a really good how growth changes is when meta.
One thing humans can do is figure out what other humans enjoy better than AI systems. That's where the preference, you're loading that in, but ultimately humans are the greatest preference generator. That's where the preference comes from.
And humans are actually very good at reading, like judging between two things. This goes back to the core of what RLHF and preference tuning is that it's hard to generate a good answer for a lot of problems, but it's easy to see which one is better. That's how we're using humans for AI now, is judging which one is better. That's what software engineering could look like. The PR review, here's a few options. What are here's the potential pros and cons, and they're going to be judges.
I think the thing I would very much recommend is programmers start using AI and embracing that role as supervisor of the AI system and like partner of the AI system versus writing from scratch or not learning coding at all and just generating stuff. And I think there actually has to be a pretty high level of expertise as a programmer to be able to manage increasingly intelligent systems.
I think it's that, and then becoming a domain expert.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Because like seriously, if you go look at aerospace or semiconductors or chemical engineering, everyone is using really crappy platforms, really old software. Like the job of a data scientist is like a joke, right? In many cases, it's very real, but it's like bring what the forefront of human capabilities are to your domain, and like even if the forefront is like some AI, your domain, you're like at the forefront, right? So it's like you have to be at the forefront of something, and then leverage the like rising tide that is AI or everything else.
Oh yeah, there's so many low hanging fruit everywhere in terms of where software can like help automate a thing or digitize a thing. In the legal system, I mean, that's why Doge is exciting. Yeah, I got to hang out with a bunch of the Doge folks, and government is like so old school. It's like begging for the modernization of software, of organizing the data, of all this kind of stuff. I mean, in that case, it's by design because bureaucracy protects centers of power and so on. But software breaks down those barriers, so it hurts those that are holding on to power, but ultimately benefits humanity. So there's a bunch of domains of that kind. One thing we didn't fully finish talking about is open source. So first of all, congrats. You released a new model.
Yeah, Tulu. I'll explain what a Tulu is. A Tulu is a hybrid camel when you breed a dromedary with a Bactrian camel. Back in the early days after ChatGPT, there was a big wave of models coming out like alpaca, vicuna, etc., that were all named after various mammalian species. So Tulu is the brand is multiple years old, which comes from that, and we've been playing at the frontiers of post training with open source code, and this first part of this release was in the fall where we built on Llama's open models, open weight models, and then we add in our fully open code, our fully open data. There's a popular benchmark that is Chatbot Arena, and that's generally the metric by which how these chat models are evaluated, and it's humans compare random models from different organizations. And if you looked at the leaderboard in November or December, among the top 60 models from tens, 20s of organizations, none of them had open code or data for just post-training. Among that, even fewer or none have pre-training data and code available, but post-training is much more accessible at this time. It's still pretty cheap and we can do it. And the thing is, like, how high can we push this number where people, this is something that the DeepSeek paper talked about as well, is like as this bigger model, it's easier to elicit powerful capabilities with this RL training, and then they distill it down from that big model to a small model. And this model we released today, we saw the same thing. If we're at AI2, we don't have a ton of compute, we can't train 4 or 5 B models all the time, so we just did a few runs, and they tend to work, and it just shows that there's a lot of room for people to play in these things, and they crushed Llama's actual release, right? Like they're way better than so our eval numbers, I mean, we have extra months in this, but our eval numbers are much better than the Llama instruct model that they released.
And then you also said the evidence for safety.
On our eval benchmark. The most DeepSeek v3 is really similar. We have a safety benchmark to understand if it will say harmful things and things like that, and that's what draws it down most of the way.
It's like an amalgamation of multiple benchmarks.
So we have a 10 evaluation. This is standard practice in post training. Is you choose your evaluations you care about. In academics, in smaller labs, you'll have fewer evaluations. In companies, you'll have a really one domain that you really care about. In frontier labs, you'll have tens to 20s to maybe even like 100 evaluations of specific things. So we choose a representative suite of things that look like chat, precise instruction following, which is like respond only in emojis, like this model follow weird things like that, math, code, and you create a suite like this. So safety would be 1 of 10 in that type of suite where you say, what does the broader community of AI care about? And for example, in comparison to DeepSeek, it would be something like our average eval for our model would be 80, including safety, and similar without. And DeepSeek would be like 79% average score without safety, and their safety score would bring it down.
So you beat them even ignoring safety.
So this is something that internally, it's like I don't want to win only by like how you shape the eval benchmark. So if there's something that's like people may or may not care about safety in the model, safety can come downstream. Safety can be when you host the model for an API. Like safety is addressed in a spectrum of locations in AI applications. So it's like if you want to say that you have the best recipe, you can't just gate it on these things that some people might not want. And this is going to, it's like the time of progress. We benefit if we can model Llama if you touch it to the Llama model. So it's like the branding thing. So if a company uses Llama, technically the license says that they should say built with Llama at the bottom of their application. And from like a marketing perspective, that just hurts. Like I can suck it up as a researcher. I'm like, oh, it's fine. Like it says Llama dash on all of our materials for this release. But this is why we need truly open models, which is we don't know DeepSeek R1's data. But
Wait, so you're saying I can't make a cheap copy of Llama and pretend it's mine, but I can do this with the training model?
That's what I'm saying. And that's why it's like we want this whole open language model thing, the OLMO thing, is to try to keep the model where everything is open with the data as close to the frontier as possible. So we're compute constrained, we're personnel constrained, we rely on getting insights from people. John Schulman tells us to do RL and outputs. Like we can make these big jumps, but it just takes a long time to push the frontier of open source. And fundamentally, I would say that that's because open source AI does not have the same feedback loops as open source software. We talked about open source software for security. Also, it's just because you build something once and you can reuse it. If you go to a new company, there's so many benefits. But if you open source a language model, you have this data sitting around, you have this training code. It's not like that easy for someone to come and build on and improve, because you need to spend a lot of compute, you need to have expertise. So until there are feedback loops of open source AI, it seems mostly an ideological mission. People like Mark Zuckerberg are just like, America needs this. And I agree with him, but in the time where the motivation ideologically is high, you need to capitalize and build this ecosystem around what benefits do you get from seeing the language model data. And there's not a lot about that. We're going to try to launch a soon where you can look at an OLMO model in a query and see what pre-training data is supported to it, which is like legally risky and complicated, but it's like, what does it mean to see the data that the AI was trained on? It's hard to parse. It's terabytes of files. It's like I don't know what I'm going to find in there. But that's what we need to do as an ecosystem if people want open source AI to be financially useful.
We didn't really talk about Stargate. I would love to get your opinion on like what the new administration, the Trump administration, everything that's being done from the America side in supporting AI infrastructure and the efforts of the different AI companies. What do you think about Stargate? What are we supposed to think about Stargate and does Sam have the money?
Yeah, so I think Stargate is a opaque thing. It definitely doesn't have $500 billion, but they have $100 billion, right? So what they announced is this $500 billion number. Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and Trump said it. They thanked Trump, and Trump did do some executive actions that like do significantly improve the ability for this to be built faster. One of the executive actions he did is on federal land, you can just basically build data centers of power, like pretty much like that. And then the permitting process is basically gone, or you can file after the fact. So like one of the, again, like I had a schizo take Presidio in San Francisco, beautiful area. And so OpenAI was able to get it with this like weird joint venture called Stargate. They initially signed a deal with just Oracle for the first section of this cluster, right? This first section of this cluster, right, is roughly $5 billion to $6 billion of server spend, right? And then there's another billion or so of data center spend. But and then likewise, like if you fill out that entire 1.8 gigawatts with the next two generations of NVIDIA's chips, GB200, GB300, VR200, and you fill it out completely, that ends up being roughly $50 billion of server costs, right? Plus there's data center costs, plus maintenance costs, plus operation costs, plus all these things. And that's where OpenAI gets to their $100 billion announcement that they had, right? Because they talked about $100 billion is phase one. That's this Abilene, Texas data center, right? $100 billion is total cost of ownership, quote unquote, right? So it's not capex, it's not investment, it's $100 billion of total cost of ownership. And then there will be future phases. They're looking at other sites that are even bigger than this 2.2 gigawatts, by the way, in Texas and elsewhere. And so they're not completely ignoring that, but there is the number of $100 billion that they face in phase one, which I do think will happen. They don't even have the money for that. Furthermore, it's not $100 billion; it's $50 billion of spend, right? And then like $50 billion of operational cost, power, etc., rental pricing, etc. Because they're renting it. OpenAI is renting the GPUs from the Stargate joint venture, right? What money do they actually have, right? SoftBank is going to invest. Oracle's going to invest. OpenAI is on the line for $19 billion. Everyone knows that they've only got $6 billion in their last round, $4 billion in this. So, but there's like news of like SoftBank maybe investing $25 billion into OpenAI, right? So that's part of it, right? So $19 billion to come from there. OpenAI does not have the money at all, right? To be clear, ink is not dried on anything. OpenAI has $0 for this $50 billion, right? In which they're legally obligated to put $19 billion of capex or into the joint venture, and then the rest they're going to pay via renting the GPUs from the joint venture. And then there's Oracle. Oracle has a lot of money. They're building the first section completely. They were spending for it themselves, right? This $6 billion of capex, $10 billion of TCO. But they were going to do that first section. They're paying for that, right? As far as the rest of the section, I don't know how much Larry wants to spend, right? At any point he can pull out, right? Like this is like completely voluntary. So at any point there's no signed ink on this, right? But he potentially could contribute tens of billions of dollars, right? But he's got the money. Oracle's got the money. And then there's like NGX, which is the UAE fund, which technically has $1.5 trillion for investing in AI. But again, like I don't know how real that money is, and like there is no ink signed for this. SoftBank does not have $25 billion sort of sending it to all of our clients, including many of these companies that are building the multi-gigawatts. But that is like at a level that's not quite maybe executives like seeing $500 billion, $100 billion, and then everyone's asking about like. So it could spur like another like an even faster arms race, right? Because there's already an arms race, but like this like $100 billion, $500 billion number, Trump talking about it on TV, like it could spur the arms race even faster, and more investors to flood in, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're right in that sense that OpenAI, or sort of Trump is sort of like championing people are going to build more, and his actions are going to let people build more.
What are you excited about these several years that are upcoming in terms of cluster build outs, in terms of breakthroughs in AI, like the best possible future you could imagine in the next couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years? What does that look like? Just it could be very specific technical things like breakthroughs on post training, or it could be just size, big,
Yeah, I mean
impressive clusters.
I really enjoy tracking the supply chain and like who's involved in what.
Yeah.
I really do. It's really fun to see like the numbers, the cost, who's building what capacity, helping them figure out how much the customers should build, winning deals, strategic stuff. That's really cool. I think technologically, there's a lot around the networking side that really excites me. With optics and electronics, right? Like kind of getting closer and closer, whether it be co-packaged optics or some sort of like quantum leaf switching.
This is internal to cluster.
Yeah. Also, multi-data center training, right? Like, there's people are putting so much fiber between these data centers and lighting it up with so many different, with so much bandwidth that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on that end, right? Telecom has been really boring since 5G, and now it's like really exciting again. On the fiber side.
Can you educate me a little bit about the speed of things? So the speed of memory versus the speed of interconnect versus the speed of fiber between data centers. Are these like orders of magnitude different? Can we at some point converge towards a place where it all just feels like one computer?
No, I don't think that's possible. It's only gonna get harder to program, not easier.
Okay.
It's only gonna get more difficult and complicated and more layers, right? The general image that people like to have is like this hierarchy of memory. So on chip is really close, localized within the chip, right? You have registers, right? And those are shared between some compute elements, and then you have caches, which are shared between more compute elements. And then you have like memory, right? Like HBM or DRAM, like DDR memory or whatever it is, and that's shared between the whole chip. And then you can have pools of memory that are shared between many chips, right? And then storage, and you keep zoning out, right? The access latency across data centers, across within the data center, within a chip, is different. So like you're always going to have different programming paradigms for this. It's not going to be easy. Programming this stuff is going to be hard. Maybe AI is, right? With programming this, but the way to think about it is that like there is
Where all these clusters, like all the information you're gathering. I mean,
there's a big team. There's a big team.
I mean, you do quite incredible work with semi analysis. I mean, just keeping your finger on the pulse of human civilization in the digital world. Pretty cool. Like just to watch, feel that.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, yeah.
Feel all of us like doing shit, epic shit.
Build API.
I mean, from meme to like reality. Is there like breakthroughs that you're like looking forward to potentially?
I had a while to think about this. That one's beautiful response. I knew this was coming, and it's like realistically, training models is very fun because there's so much low hanging fruit. And the thing that makes my job entertaining and train models, I write analysis about what's happening with models, and it's fun because there is obviously so much more progress to be had. And the real motivation why I do this, like somewhere where I can share things, is that there's just I don't trust people that are like, trust me, bro, we're gonna make AI good. Like we're the ones that it's like we're gonna do it, and you can trust us, and we're just gonna have all the AI. And it's just like I would like a future where more people have a say in what AI is and can understand it. And that's it's a little bit less fun that it's not a like positive thing of like this is just all really fun. Like, training models is fun. Bring people in is fun, but it's really like AI, if it is going to be the most powerful technology of my lifetime, it's like we need to have a lot of people involved in making that, and
making it open helps with that. As successful as possible, as open as possible. Yeah.
My read of the last few years is that more openness would help the AI ecosystem in terms of having more people understand what's going on, whether that's researchers from non-AI fields to governments to everything. It doesn't mean that openness will always be the answer. I think that I will reassess of like what is the biggest problem facing AI and tack on a different angle to the wild ride that we're on.
And for me, just from even the user experience, anytime you have the, like what Fatih said, the aha moments, like the magic, like seeing the reasoning, the chain of thought,
it's like there's something really just fundamentally beautiful about that. It's putting a mirror to ourselves and seeing like, oh shit, it is solving intelligence. Is the cliche like goal of these companies is you get to understand why we humans are special. The intelligence within us is special, and for now also why we are special in terms of we seem to be conscious and the AI systems for now aren't until solved. We'll get to
There's just fundamental human goodness and trying to amplify that for on a tenuous time and if you look at humanity as a whole, there's been times when things go backwards, there's times when things don't happen at all, and we're on a what should be very positive trajectory right now.
Yeah, there seems to be progress, but just like with power, there's like spikes of human suffering, and we want to try to minimize the amount of spikes.
Generally, humanity is going to suffer a lot less, right? I'm very optimistic about that. I do worry of like techno-fascism type stuff arising as AI becomes more and more prevalent and powerful, and those who control it can do more and more. Maybe it doesn't kill us all, but at some point, every very powerful human is going to want a great computer interface so that they can interact with the AGI and all of its advantages in many more ways and merge its mind with, sort of like, and its capabilities or that person's capabilities can leverage those much better than anyone else and therefore be, it won't be one person rule them all, but it will be, the thing I worry about is it'll be like a few people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of people rule whoever's left, right? And the economy around it, right? And I think that's like the thing that's probably more worrisome is like human machine amalgamations. This enables an individual human to have more impact on the world, and that impact can be both positive and negative, right? Generally, humans have positive impacts on the world, at least societally. But it's possible for individual humans to have such negative impacts. And AGI, at least as I think the labs define it, which is not a runaway sentient thing, but rather just something that can do a lot of tasks really efficiently, amplifies the capabilities of someone causing extreme damage. But for the most part, I think it'll be used for profit-seeking motives, which will increase the abundance and supply of things and therefore reduce suffering. Right?
It's like scrolling on a timeline, just
scrolling in stasis. Scrolling holds the status quo of the world. That is a positive outcome, right?
Yeah.
Like if I have food tubes and like I'm scrolling and I'm happy, that's a positive outcome.
While expanding out into the cosmos. Well, this is a fun time to be alive. And thank you for pushing the forefront of what is possible in humans. And thank you for talking to it.
It's fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Dylan Patel and Nathan Lambert. Support this podcast. Please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Richard Feynman. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations. For nature cannot be fooled. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time. We feel their absence when they don't have them. But for us, we had never worn shoes in our lives. So how would we even know that wearing shoes was a big deal? We weren't in a position to compare. That's just how we lived. When I became prime minister, I specially invited Pakistan to my swearing-in ceremony so we could turn over a new leaf. Yet every noble attempt at fostering peace was met with hostility and betrayal. We sincerely hope that wisdom prevails upon them
death
and
Elizabeth
they
was
choose
taken.
the path of peace.
Elizabeth was sure to death Elizabeth
And they
was
choose
taken.
the path of peace.
Elizabeth was taken
I
by
believe
her.
even the people
She
of
knew
Pakistan long
deep
for
within her
peace.
heart that these
Look,
men were all
regarding what you said
necessary
about
for her
criticism
losing
and
her.
how I deal with it,
The
if I had to
astronaut
summarize in
confronted
one
criticism.
sentence, I
Despite his
welcome it.
English accent, he and his companion were
I have a
Russian
strong
agents